Disc 4.
His phone rings, and he sees it is Finbar, which makes his heart a little gladder. "What's up?" says Finbar. "I'm on the Wirral." "Ah, you know it?" "Sailed past it a few times. Good sailing, but it's a bastard if you don't know what you're doing." Staffe recalls the one time that he went sailing with Finn, a year or so before his friend's calamity. The phone is quiet for a long moment, and each man decides to give that subject a wide berth. "I've got something for that pal of yours," says Finbar. "Jadis? You can pick him for Christ's sake." "You met him?" "Got one of my muckers in the post-room to take a look at him. They got something in the non-con." "Non-con?" "Safe matter, non-confidential. We have two kinds of waste here." "Waste?" "It's recycling. That pal of yours can do his bit to save the world. It's only £7 an hour, I'm afraid. That's the best I can do." "You're a star, Finn. I'll make it up to you." "I'll make sure of that, don't doubt it. Got to go." Staffe is kind of sad not to talk to Finbar for longer, and he feels a tug back to London, looks back towards the estuary and sees that the mist has come further up. He looks for the water tower, can't see it any more even though he squints for it. He thinks his eyes might be playing up. The baby has been heavy on Zoe's bladder all morning, and now it kicks her. She puts her hand to her stomach and swallows away a curse, reminds herself of what she owes this baby, the second chance it brought her, not the other way around. That happiness soon fades, is replaced by fear as to what will become of her. She tries to concentrate on what would have become of her had she not had this baby. At university, she used to think of the footprints she would leave in the sand. Then she had gone back to Liverpool. She hadn't meant to stay, but she had bumped into Anthony again. It had seemed only a small surrender in a constant and sometimes pointless struggle. She thought she knew what she was, but that night it had seemed easier not to be, and she allowed him to tell her he loved her and always had. A mist has come in, fast from the sea, and she watches as the heron glides away from her, swallowed up by the sea vapours that race up the River Dee. She goes back to the big cushion and sits with her legs apart, stroking her belly, thinking the baby will come sooner than anyone thinks. For an odd moment, she wishes Anthony was here. Wishes she could have loved him the way he deserves. If only she could be held for a moment or so, or a whole afternoon. If only her father were here, and she was young again, before it all happened. A sob forms in the back of her throat, and she swallows it away, heaves herself to her feet, not able to keep still. She wants to be out amongst the world. She craves a conversation, and reaches for the door, twists the handle, but it resists. Locked. "Let me out!" she calls, banging on the door. The baby kicks again, and nobody is there, save the life inside her. Pulford hands across the free tickets that Philip Ramone had given him. The transvestite on the kiosk flutters his thick lashes at the bashful young sergeant, gives him the knowingest of looks. "New blood," he purrs in a gravelly voice that comes between glazed red lips. "Is Philip in?" says Pulford, trying to avoid the transvestite's look. Instead of looking him in the eye, he unwittingly diverts his attention to the thoroughly convincing cleavage. "Oh my," murmurs the transvestite. "I'm afraid he doesn't take visitors." Josie leans across, shows her warrant card. "Ah, I see." He looks Pulford up and down. "Make sure you come in uniform next time. I'm Juanita, if you need to know." They press against the crowd in the bar and force through onto the dance floor. Above, and in front of his office on the mezzanine, Philip Ramone sits alone at a small table, alternately sipping champagne and sucking on a replica cigarette. He looks washed out, perusing his punters like the curmudgeonly judge on a talent show. Jimmy Somerville is belting out his version of I Feel Love, and Bronski Beat's furious rhythm fills the dance floor. The crowd spins round, hands behind their backs, as if they're handcuffed dervishes. "You didn't waste any time cashing in your freebies," says Philip Ramone. "Events have overtaken us," says Josie, pulling up a chair and sitting alongside Ramone, who pours them each a glass of champagne. She notices it is vintage Taittinger, and can't help taking a sip. Looking down at the dancing crowd, she suddenly feels energised. They sit close together, so the three of them can hear each other. "Events? It's a shame you didn't tell us how Kerry came to get her residency." "I never said my memory was perfect, did I?" "Somebody persuaded you to take her on Sean's behalf." Bronski Beat fades to naught, and is replaced by the effortless boom of Rick Astley's masquerading soul. Eventually Ramone says, "You should watch yourselves." "We need to hear it from you, Philip." "Somebody's been shooting their mouth off. He'll find out, and woe betide the poor fuckers when he does." "Did they meet through you, Philip?" asked Josie. Ramone shakes his head. "You're city police, right?" Josie nods. "And he's a West London boy, as you know. If I were you, that would be my excuse to leave well alone." "I'll make it easy for you," says Josie, leaning forward, taking another sip of Taittinger. "Was Tommy Given seeing Kerry Degg?" Philip Ramone appears to shudder. "You have to tell us, Philip," says Pulford. "We won't be dropping this, and soon we'll be sitting down with Given." Ramone shakes his head. He looks down on his dancing clients, but can't derive a smile from the joyous abandon. Tonight he remains uninfected. "He wouldn't do that to Sean." "But he looked out for Sean." "That's how it seemed to me, is all I can say. And it's all I will say. Tommy's clean," says Ramone, standing up. "Always has been, and that's official." 16. Michael Flanagan looks kind of defeated when he spots Staffe waiting for him by the pond in Prince's Park. He sits alongside Staffe on a bench, and for a few moments they watch two young men cast their lines. They're set for the day, and have a windshield and cool boxes and chairs. They chat and laugh like old boys. "Why didn't you tell me you saw Zoe the day she was taken?" says Staffe. "I was ashamed." "You had a row. What was it about?" "What makes you think we had a row?" "What makes you think I won't do everything I can to save Zoe? Why didn't you tell me?" "She doesn't love him, you know. Can you imagine what it must be like to carry the life of someone you can't stand? The first baby nearly killed her. I don't care about no more grandkids. She's my baby." "She was going to get rid of her baby, wasn't she, Michael?" "It'll be a life sentence to bring it up when you think where it came from. A constant reminder. I can see how she saw it." "But you wanted her to keep the baby, even so." "That's because I just can't imagine a not, you know, what that involves." "I need to know exactly what you did that day, where you were." "I wouldn't harm her. I couldn't. I just didn't know what to do for the best." He stands up, takes a marbled blue notebook from his pocket. It has an elastic band around it, and when Michael removes the band, he takes a stack of betting slips from the back of the notebook. It's my weakness. She thinks I don't do it no more. He laughs, the weak satisfaction of a meaningless victory. I keep track, see, of what I stake and what I win. He flicks through the pile of pink slips and picks out half a dozen. All losers from that day. He reads out the names and the racecourses and the times, even the odds, from the 1:05 handicap chase at Wincanton to the 5:43 dog race at Walthamstow. But I had a winner. He flicks through the notebook. Thrice in Bundoran. I had £2 on at 15-2. I ended the day £1 down, not much for a whole afternoon's entertainment. You could have got these slips from off the betting shop floor. Michael looks hurt. Says, ask in the shop. They know me. He sits back down and they watch the two fishermen for a while. She came to me for help. And what did I do? I made it worse. I said she had to let it run its course. I was worried for her. You should have seen her the last time when she lost it. I couldn't bear the thought of her having that done to her. I was being selfish. That's what it was. Anthony knew, didn't he? She was scared and she came to me. He knew all right, the bastard. What do you think he might have done? Michael shakes his head. Staffe says, Anthony told me he could never hurt Zoe. He did that to her, though, when she wasn't interested. Do you think... Don't, says Michael. I can't think about it. I'd kill him, fucking kill him. His hands turn into fists and he bites his lip. I'm sorry, Inspector. I don't swear, not normally. After a while, Michael stands up and says, I turned a blind eye. It's not what a father should do. Josie watches D.I. Smethurst walking down from Putney Bridge to the riverbank. He is Smet to his friends, not that he has many, and he's with the Met, and some kind of a mucker of staffs, though Josie would never put them together. Every so often, Smet tries to hitch his belt a little higher, but it doesn't last more than a dozen paces. He sucks on a cigarette and has a sheen of sweat on his forehead and jowls. As he gets close, it is clear that he doesn't know what he's looking for. So Josie stands up from the low wall that runs between the Duke's Head and the Thames and says, D.I. Smethurst? His eyes light up, and he can't help himself look her up and down. Chancellor, have we met? I was in uniform. Is he here? Given. He's inside. You have got the all clear to do this? Yes, says Josie, looking away across the river. You spoke to Staffe. He said it was okay. Yes. She turns quickly, pouts at him, watches him blink. Good. This is a favour, you know. Smethurst leads the way between the luncheon stragglers and the early bar, through the dining room and right into the front snug. There, dappled in the low spring sun, is a suited heavyweight with a steely mop of golden hair. He has an open shirt with thick gold around his neck and jewels on most of his fingers. A loose-fitting watch the size of a manhole cover. He is flanked and faced by cronies who are in tucks of laughter at something he has said. The table is littered with empty and full heavy glass tumblers of whisky and half-pints of lager. To what's the pleasure? Tommy calls to Smet, raising a glass. He doesn't see Josie straight away, but when he does, he stands, cuffs his neighbour, and offers her the chair. Maybe not here, says Smet. I'm drinking. Smet leans down, puts a hand on Tommy's shoulder as if they're on the same side, and whispers something. This lot can fuck off, says Tommy. 10 minutes? Smet nods, and the cronies gather up their drinks. As one, they take out their packs of cigarettes, no doubt glad of the relief. Josie figures that Smet must have told Tommy they were here about Sean Degg, and that Sean isn't a subject to be discussed in front of that particular group of hangers-on. Tommy holds up his hand towards the barman and makes a rapid gesture with a twist of his golden hand. By the time Josie and Smet have settled into their seats, 3 whiskies and 3 halves of lager have been brought to the table, and the occupants of the neighbouring table ushered away. Tommy clinks glasses with Smet, then Josie. Smet necks his whisky, and Josie follows suit, swallowing away her flinch. "Didn't take you long," says Tommy. "You've read about Sean's wife," says Josie. "Who's running this?" says Tommy, swiping Josie with a sideways, dismissive glance. "This is DC Chancellor, City CID, says Smet. "I'm only here for the beer." Tommy laughs from deep within his keg chest, says, "Constable's skirt, eh? I must be going down in the world." "Sean Degg has gone missing," says Josie. "He's a suspect for his wife's murder, and we know that we'd find him in no time if people would talk to us. It seems that people won't talk about Sean, though. Some say that Sean is a lowlife and would have got his comeuppance years ago if it wasn't for you." She tries her damnedest to hold Tommy Given's look. "Tongues wag in the strangest ways," says Tommy. "Maybe Sean told us about you and him?" Tommy plays with his heavy watch and looks past Josie as he addresses her. "You'll get to hear some fucking shit in your line of work, Constable. People might call Sean lowlife, but take it from me, he's not. He has integrity. That's a hard thing to find." Tommy curls his lip. "What makes you and him so close?" "What makes a tight little missy like you want to work with scum like Smet? Whoa, Tommy. You steer clear. You'll go asking questions about me and I'll know. It's bad for business." "Sean's in trouble, Mr. Given. He needs to hand himself in. Why do you protect him?" "Fuck off!" Tommy raises his hand again and flicks his wrist. The barman collects the empty glasses and the hangers-on come back in. They sit close to Josie, eyeing her up and getting lewd. Josie says, "You're a part of this investigation, Mr. Given, until you can prove we're wasting our time." "You just try, missy. See what happens." "Come on, Chancellor," says Smet, taking her by the arm. She wrings herself free, watches him weave his way out through the crowded bar, and then follows him, at a distance. Staffe persuades the constable at Liverpool General to let him see Anthony Bright, dark-eyed and with his left wrist heavily bandaged. He's pale, seems to have lost much weight this past week. As soon as Anthony sees Staffe, he can tell the inspector means business. He drags a chair up to Anthony's bed, talks fast in a raised whisper. "We need to go way back to when you first impregnated Zoe, shall we call it that? I guess we could call it a lot of things, couldn't we? How long were you with her before you realised she found you vile? Before you had to persuade her because you just didn't do it for her? You must have felt small." Staffe brings his finger and thumb almost together, right in front of Anthony Bright's eyes. Bright looks up at the uniformed PC by the door. He leans right back in his bed, but Staffe leans further forward, still in his face. "It's a strange kind of love, that, isn't it, Anthony? You've got your house, and that's a 2-year-old car in the drive, but it don't count for much when your wife won't carry your baby unless you force her. Hey, Bright?" "Get away from me!" Staffe reaches into his hip pocket, puts the parcel on the bed. He unwraps it, painstakingly. Immediately you can smell it. The herring skin is grey and silver. It is shiny, and the smell of its souse is sweet and acidic. "For you," says Staffe, offering Anthony the roll mop. "Get it away from me! I hate that shit! Why'd you bring that? Why? Staffe reaches inside his inside pocket and slams a piece of paper onto the desk, followed by a pen. He turns to the uniformed officer, shouts, "Get this bastard's lawyer in here! He needs to think again about his statement. Now!" I can't, sir. The PC looks around, shifts from the doorway, standing to one side to let D.I. Alicia Flint into the room. "Inspector Staffe," she says, "a word." In the corridor, Staffe and Flint face each other. She says, "You shouldn't be here. Not after the other day, not without me." "I got him herring. He doesn't like it." "What?" "Zoe used to buy roll mops in Parkgate. They should be for him, but he doesn't like them." "You need to leave him to me, Inspector. You really do," says Alicia. Catherine Killick hangs her keys on the coat-stand's hook in the Minton-tiled hallway of her fine cottage on the outskirts of the New Forest. The nights are beginning to draw out, and she makes her way into the large farmhouse kitchen, listens to her security aide manoeuvre his way across the gravel drive and drive away, into town for the Chinese. She places her red ministry box on the scrub pine table and kicks off her shoes. Miss Etheridge has been in and set the fires, and a smell of burning wood hangs in the house. She rubs her stomach and opens the box, flicks through the papers. She will do them first thing in the morning. Knows she will rise at first light, if not before. She doesn't have to be at the hospital until 10. Cathy wonders how the press, or, God forbid, the people, will react to Vernon Short's bill being laid to rest. And what of the missing woman in Liverpool? Will she be superseded by some different kind of news altogether? Her husband, Alex, is in Brussels until Friday, and she misses him. He should be back tomorrow, and she was quite cruel when he left. She wants to take back what she said. He is a good man, will be a good father. The wood crackles in the grate, and she eases herself slowly down to her knees and removes the guard, riddles the fire, feels its heat on her face. This baby is a long time coming. Upstairs, the floor creaks, and she looks behind her. For a moment she thinks Alex might have come home early. But then the radiators rattle, and she realises it must be the house groaning as it warms through. Cathy watches the flames and loses herself, wonders how much time she will ever have for this baby. She will be 42 next year, and when she found out she was heavy with child, she had cried tears of unrestrained joy. Alex had been shocked, said he didn't know why she was so happy, said that she had never said she wanted a baby so badly, had said nothing about the baby that she could have had 14 years earlier when she was first shortlisted for that safe seat in East Hamlets. She stands, heaving herself up on the brass coal box at the side of the fire, not wanting to think about that. Cathy puts a milk pan on the Aga and pours in some blue top. She watches it beginning to roll, sliding it off the seat so it doesn't boil. And she thinks what a wonder it is that she has made it so far, to here. All she ever dreamed of. She tips a wary glug of whisky into the pan and puts it on the table. Lets it sit until the spirited milk forms a skin, which she will skim. She will sleep well tonight. After the first sip, her head feels gladder, as if she's better prepared for what's coming at her. The floorboards creak again, and again she turns round, hoping she might see Alex in the doorway, and she gasps, thinks for a moment that he is here. She actually puts her tongue hard on the roof of her mouth to say the D of darling. The eyes of the man in the balaclava are wide and mad, and his lips are the red of pillar boxes. His teeth are yellow. "Sit down," he says, coming towards her and tapping a leather cosh against his thigh. Cathy cannot move. The baby presses down on her bladder as the man takes her by the arm. His breath is sweet and bad. He places the end of his leather cosh on her stomach. Cathy misses her breath, and her heart misses too. Her mouth loses its form, and her lungs are empty. "Why?" she whispers, unable to look at him.
"You know why? You can't pick and choose, just to suit your own fancy."
He touches her, and she makes tiny steps as he directs her towards an armchair beside the dresser. He takes out a phone, presses a number, and she hears her own tone pipe up from within her handbag. It is Dreams by Fleetwood Mac, and for an instant she catches a scent of that young girl, less blemished. The man grabs her bag and takes out the phone, then removes the battery. He throws the two parts of the phone on the fire. Curiously, Cathy calls out, You can't do that!" She doesn't actually know what happens if you put batteries on a fire, just that it's bad. "You think I want to do this?" He drags a dining chair to her and sits on it. Once more he rests the end of his cosh on her belly. It is heavy, harder than it looks, and she thinks it has lead in it. She bites her lip, can easily imagine herself crying. The man says, "Yuck your babies, don't you, Home Secretary? That's what people will say. They'll say, what's so special about her baby?" When he talks, his lips seem mad and out of kilter with his words. "They'll say that you choose who lives and who doesn't, so why can't someone like me?" He presses the cosh, and she shifts back, the chair hard to her spine, and nowhere further to go. He follows, with the tip of the cosh. I don't," says Cathy, unsure what she could say for the best. "You know what I'm talking about, don't you? I'm here to speak for the ones who have no voice." He says this by rote, like a child in a classroom. He stares Cathy in the eye. Everything is still. "And that includes your child." Cathy loses her breath again. She gasps. "You had your career then, and now you are having your baby. Now it suits." He stops talking, leans back, and his wet lips spread into a smile. Cathy sees a slackening in the man's eyes. He lets the cosh slide down and away from her stomach, and he stands. He breathes deep. His chest rises and falls, slower. He envelops his top lip within his bottom, then opens his mouth, saying as slowly as he can make himself, "We want the killing to stop. But we know that can't happen, not overnight. But we can make it better. You can make it better. We get the bill, right? This way or the other, it is our time. It's what the people want, for Vernon to change his mind before it's too late." He tosses the cosh to Cathy, and she catches it, just, but its tip knocks into her. She holds it, watches him go. She hears the door close, then his steps across the gravel. And she cries, holding and loving her baby, and mourning too. 17. Staffe tips a third miniature into the plastic cup which the Metropolitan Hotel has provided for his bathroom. He's now on the brandy, having drunk the Bells and the Glenfiddich. He should really go down to the White Star, which is his kind of pub, cloistered with panelled booths, segregated from the bar by stained-glass panes, and with an array of proper beer. But here he is, sitting at the foot of his bed looking out onto the city. Between the civic monoliths he can see the top of the Liver building, the black sky beyond, laid out above Wales. He slowly goes over what Zoe's father had said to him, and what he said to Anthony Bright, and what Flint had said to him. He knows Bright is still holding out on him, but can see that he might have gone too far. Sometimes, though, you have to go too far. Staffe looks at the brandy and swirls it, watches it catch the light, round and round. The phone rings, and he downs the spirit in one, feels its burn, easing into the gut of him. "Yes," he says. "We've got a problem." It is Pennington, and he sounds unnerved. Pennington is never unnerved, or so he would have it. "You've got a problem?" The phone is silent. He can practically hear Pennington seething. Pennington says, "Jesus!" "What is it, sir?" In the window he can see himself looking him in the eye. He seems lost, with the waterfront city behind him. "I'm in bloody Hampshire, man, in the middle of nowhere. This case is out of control." "Hampshire? Why didn't you send Pulford?" "I'm trusting you, Staffe. This goes no further." "Go on." "I've just been with the Home Secretary." "Cathy Killick?" Staffe feels bilious. He should have eaten. "She's been threatened. They said they'd kill her baby, the Home Secretary. It's a bloody disaster." "It must be that bill of Vernon Short's." "Straight to the top of the class, Staffe." "You need to get hold of Leslie Crawford." "She's gone missing. Quelle bloody surprise. You'd better get yourself back down here. Toot sweet, man. I don't care what time you get in, you call me. And not a word of this to anyone." Staffe puts down the phone and packs as quickly as he can. When he is done, when he looks out on the city, glimpsing the estuary between the buildings, it feels wrong. His work here is not done. And he picks up the phone, calls Alicia Flint. "I have to go," he says. "I just wanted to say good luck with the case." He can hear Ethan shouting in the background. "You have to go?" Despite what happened with Anthony Bright, she sounds disappointed. "Zoe went to Parkgate. She bought herrings for somebody." "Bloody herrings again?" "I think it's important." Ethan screams. She says, "I've got to go," and hangs up. Josie sips her tea and watches Sheila Archibald go through the archway into the dining room to tend to Miles and Maya. Husband John knocked it through from the lounge himself, so they could keep an eye on the children while they had their dinner. John is proud of his work. The Archibalds like their quiz shows, and the opening titles for another programme come up on the big old tank of a telly. John watches the drama unfold with one eye as the children sit at the dining table, despite Josie's suggestion that Miles and Maya might be better upstairs. She says to John, "The father has gone to ground. Has he been in touch?" For a moment John looks confused. "The father?" "Sean." "Ah." "You know he's not." Josie lowers her voice to a whisper. "The real dad." "That's not our concern." Through the archway, Sheila takes the plates away from the children, even though they haven't touched the fish fingers or peas on their plates. The oven chips are all gone. Sheila says, "No clean plates, no pudding." "I want a biscuit," says Maya. "Bedtime," says Sheila. The children slide off their chairs, looking glum. It is 7 o'clock. "We thought he might have tried to see them," says Josie. "Your call if he does." Sheila takes the children upstairs, and John Archibald looks at Josie from the corner of his eye. "We are not involved. It's our misfortune, that's all it is. You have to understand. We won't be roped in." "Kerry must have talked to you about their real father. That's your concern, surely, in the children's interests." "She only came around once, we told you." Josie finishes her tea and places the cup and saucer on the coffee table. It is glass-topped and has a shelf below. On the shelf are a couple of romantic novels, a TV guide from the tabloids, and a travel brochure for cruises. she contemplates asking John if he and Sheila are planning a trip, but decides against. Instead says, "There's the funeral to think about. We'll let you know, of course, but I can't say when it might be. I suppose Kerry's sister will be the one to organise it, now the dad's missing. The children should be there, but I'll talk to the care worker about that. She'll do an assessment." "We wouldn't want any part of that, the funeral, I mean." "No, of course not." Upstairs a child cries. Josie thinks it is Maya, but can't be sure. She says good evening to John Archibald, and at the door, which is panelled with frosted glass, she reminds him to let her know when Sean Degg gets in touch. "What makes you think he will?" "Oh, he will," says Josie. "He isn't a bad man, and he's the closest those children have got to a real father." "You can't know that, though." John looks up the stairs, follows the noise from the children and his wife. He looks like a child in a supermarket aisle, bereft of its mother. Josie takes a step closer, softly says, "We'll get whoever did this. We owe it to those children, don't we?" John nods, averting his eyes. He looks down at the telephone stand by the door. "Between you and me, John, we know who Kerry was seeing. We know who was looking out for her, or should I say Sean." Upstairs, a commotion breaks out. Maya cries. Josie knows it's her for sure this time, because above the crying and the stern coaxing of Sheila Archibald, she hears the voice of a young boy pleading, "I want my dad. I'll tell him. I'll tell him." Josie has heard enough and lets herself out, leaves the Archibalds to their contrived domestic. Outside she turns right at the gate and waves to John, who watches her, all the way. She goes past her car, which is unmarked and on the opposite side of the street. At the end of the road she turns right again and waits for 3 minutes, then goes back onto the Archibald Street, texts Pulford and tells him it might be time. Then she waits 10 more minutes and returns to her car. It is cold in the car, but she resists the temptation to turn on the engine and suck in the hot air. From here she can see the Archibalds' home quite clearly. The upstairs lights go off, and she tries not to dwell on what long, sleepless gloom the children face. Downstairs, the hall light comes on. 2 shapes appear in the frosted panes of the front door, beside the telephone stand. Josie texts Pulford again. "Archibald's calling. Anything your end?" Pulford gestures to the barmaid from the side bar of the Duke's Head and asks for another glass of low-alcohol lager. All the while, through the gap between the optics and the counter in the opposite bar, he keeps an eye on what goes on in the front snug. Tommy Given and his entourage have been guffawing and drinking, slapping each other and taking the piss out of the barmaid since early doors, just like Smet had said. Smet didn't have to go to a file or refer it around the Met. He knew straight off. And he told Pulford to steer well clear and not be seen. For fuck's sake, not to be seen. Some folk have ventured into Tommy's sphere, but few have stayed. A couple of old-timers schlep against the bar, happy to be victims of the gang's chidings. They give as good as they get. They're in some kind of circle, and probably have been since the good old days. But now the laughter stops. Pulford leans down, gets his change, and sees that Tommy has a serious look on his face. Pulford leans further down so he can see Tommy properly beneath the optics. He sees all of Tommy for the first time, as he stands, how broad he is, how hard he is. Tommy raises the phone to his ear and pushes one of his cronies out of his way. He has a good face, bright blue eyes and a strong jaw, a boxer's nose and big golden brown hair all combed back. His skin is white, almost translucent, and he has a scar across one cheek, from his eye to the lobe of his ear. There's a big ring on each big finger of both his big hands. He makes his way out of the bar, pausing at the door, phone still raised to his ear. Pulford can't make out what he's saying, but it's bad news for somebody. He points at one of the entourage, who stands, leaves the rest of his orange juice. The driver? As soon as Tommy is gone, Pulford turns his back to the bar and texts Josie. "They're coming. Make scarce. On my way." Josie knows she should make herself scarce. Pulford had told her what Smet said about not being seen, and she twirls the car keys around her finger, looks back at the Archibald's house. The shapes in the frosted windows of the front door are gone, and the hall lights flick off. She knows it will be 15-20 minutes if he comes at all. What harm can she do? She thinks about Grace, and what it must have been like to be born like that. What kind of repercussions there will be. She's been thinking through the possibilities all day. Josie does her hair into a high-up ponytail and pulls a baseball cap from the glove compartment, then teases her ponytail through the gap in the back of the cap. She drags a pea jacket from under the passenger seat and takes off her tailored woolen blazer, folds it neatly and places it under the seat. Josie zips the pea jacket right up and checks her watch. Kills minutes by sifting the backlog of text on her mobile. As she does it, she realises how seldom she returns messages from her friends. She can't remember the last time she saw any of them. She gets out of the car and pulls the peak of her cap right down. There's a mini-mart on the corner, and she walks up to it, slouching, hands thrust in the pockets of the short jacket. It is cold now the sun is down. There might be a frost tonight. In the mini-mart, which does halal, she keeps an eye on the street. There's every chance they will come by this way, from off the North Circular. She asks for a can of Diamond Power, and the owner IDs her. For a second she feels a glow of satisfaction, but has to be careful not to let him see her warrant card as she fumbles in her purse. She loiters in the shop doorway, as if its light might make her warm. She snaps the ring pull and takes a sip, tries not to balk, as its sickly sour zings in her mouth and throat. She moves away, realising the doorway isn't the place to be. Josie leans on a wall obscured from the Archibald Street by a privet hedge. She can just about see the house if she takes a step back from the hedge, and as each car passes, she raises the can to her lips, sips a little. After a while, the supercharged cider laps up to her senses, makes her feel kind of happy, optimistic about the night. Tomorrow, she will text her mates, all of them, for sure. She will be a better friend. A car approaches. It's a Merc GL, she thinks. It rolls high and comes faster than the others did. She steps back, tight against the privet, and raises the can, swigs for real. But she can't help sneaking a peek. Her heart misses a beat. Her guts feel loose. She would remember Tommy Given anywhere. He's in the driver's seat, alone. Another car comes, fast, but not quite so fast. It is Pulford, which makes her happy, and suddenly she feels stupid for getting herself worked up. All they need is to clock Tommy Given going into the Archibalds, nothing more. She lowers her can and raises the peak of her cap so he can see her. But he is on his phone, slowing now. Another car follows behind Pulford, but turns off down the side street, parks up just past the shop. She wants to wave to Pulford, but knows she can't, and presses the half-empty can into the privet and moves off towards the mini-mart. Tommy's car has slowed right down outside the Archibalds, its brake lights glowing red. But then they fizzle out and the car moves off. She'll text Pulford from inside the shop. But what will she buy? Josie stops by the entrance to the shop and looks in the window. She could get some gum or a magazine, just 17, or something like that. This makes her smile. She hears a voice from behind. Bad girl. Then she feels flesh on her face, her mouth, then the dullest pain, the slowest fall that has no landing, and straight away she is in the land of Nod. Part 3. 18. Her clothes tack to her when she tries to move. Her bones ache, and her head feels brittle. She tries to move, but it hurts too much, and she thinks she might have broken something. She opens her eyes, and it is too bright. She blinks, squints at an oval light which has a cage around it, and she can smell excrement and bleach. Josie raises her hand to her face and feels her chin and cheeks and eyes. She puts her other hand to the floor. Is it the floor? She pushes herself up and grimaces through the pain as she swivels, looking around the room. She's on a bench with a mattress no thicker than a pack of cigarettes, a steel toilet in the corner and a steel basin, a thin window high up, and a big steel door with a spy hole in it. "Shit," says Josie, realising where she is, that she is on the other side. She tries to remember how she came here. She was up at the Archibald's house, and she was waiting for Pulford, wasn't she? Josie looks down, sees her legs swing from the bench, her bare legs. She looks again and feels for her clothes, but all she has on is a short, tight mini-dress that has ridden up, and which is ripped across the midriff. It's not her dress. She doesn't have a dress like this. She heaves herself up and has to lean on the bench for support. She tugs the dress down and makes her way gingerly to the door, pounds on it. Eventually, a metal plate slides across and a female face appears. Josie says, "What am I doing here? I'm police." "Yeah, right," says the woman. "You sticking with that shit?" "My name's Josie. Josie Chancellor, DC Chancellor." "It's not what your ID says." "What?" "You give me a shout when you're through wasting our time." I want to make a call. I'm entitled." The metal plate slides shut with a sharp clank. Josie's head resounds with pain, and her thirst burns. She bangs on the door, but it hurts her hands. She shouts at the spy hole, but her throat is as dry as ash. Eventually, she eases herself back to the bench and tries to recall what happened to her. But the last thing she can remember is being held, thinking it was Pulford. And music. Was there music? Vernon Short knows better than to drive his own car. 6 months ago, after spending 9 hours over lunch at his club, he was pulled over by the police just a quarter of a mile from his townhouse in Pimlico. He blew 80 milligrams and immediately insisted on being allowed the opportunity to give a blood sample. Then his lawyer turned up and discovered that Vernon had only been given one shot at the breathalyzer. He instructed his client not to proceed with the blood sample unless he could be breathalyzed again. The duty sergeant had every confidence in his bag of crystals. The second time, 2.5 hours later, and having drunk an entire bottle of milk and magnesia, Vernon blew 29. The milk and magnesia, being alkaline, had defeated the alcohol in Vernon's system. He drove home, licence intact. The first thing he did next day was to hire Bob Tompkins, driver. Tompkins waits for his client on double yellows in Berkeley Square, the engine running, to keep him warm and to present the argument that he's not actually parked. Staffe taps on the passenger window, opens the door and gets in alongside Bob, says, "How's it going, Tompkins?" "I don't know you." He shows his warrant card and says, "Let's keep it that way. When's your boss back?" 10 minutes later, Vernon Short gets in the back and tells the driver to take him home. 5 minutes after that, he says, noticing Staffe in the front and breathing alcohol fuels all over the car. "What in God's name are you doing here? I have nothing to say to you." Staffe turns round, raises a finger to his lips.
"I'll be honest with you, Vernon. I'm not supposed to be here."
"So get out. You need to tell me what Catherine Killick promised you." "What makes you think I'll say anything to you?" "Because there isn't a cat in hell's chance you'll get a place in the cabinet. She'll fob you off with some talk of a reshuffle, and by the time it comes around, you'll have fucked up. It might be another driving mishap." "How do you know about that?" "Or a woman, or whatever it is that floats your boat. I bet she hasn't even told you what they've done now." "They?" "They? Maybe it's you. I don't think you've got the gumption or the balls, but you might know someone who has." Vernon Short looks perplexed, and is clearly a quarter cut. He rubs his temples and screws up his eyes. They practically disappear into the podgy flesh of his face. "The balls to do what?" "I can't tell you. It's a matter of national security." "You know nothing." "What was in the bag, Vernon?" "Bag? I don't know anything about the bag." Strange, thinks Staffe, to employ the definite article. Poor Vernon shouldn't drink. "Drop me at the end of the street. There'll be someone watching your place when you get there. You say nothing. Just go in and wait 5 minutes, then go out the back. I'll be there. You let me in." "Why should I?" "Because it wouldn't do for Cathy Killick to know you've been exchanging favours with Leslie Crawford. Not after what's happened." "What has happened?" "Honestly, Vernon, you don't want to know." "It involves the Home Secretary?" Staffe raises his eyebrows. "Sweet Jesus," says Vernon, leaning back, blowing out his cheeks. A man out of his depth, it would seem. Short holds a thick, cut-glass tumbler of scotch as he opens the back door and lets the inspector into his home. Staffe mooches around the kitchen. He opens the door to a utility room and downstairs loo. The room is stacked to the gunnels with Glenlivet and San Pellegrino. But, contrary to what you might expect, Vernon recycles. Of course he does. The press probably goes through his rubbish. And he puts his empty bottles in a Hessian eco-friendly bag from Waitrose Naturellement. Staffe wraps a plastic bag around the handle and picks up the eco-bag, shows it to Vernon. "Whose prints do you think I might find on this?" "What?" Vernon is incredulous. Then the penny drops, his mouth agape. "The question is, Vernon, what was in it?" I'm calling my lawyer. Anybody could have touched that bag." Staffe weighs up his options, trying to think 4, 5, 6 moves ahead. He has his finger on Vernon's queen. Why not take it? He says, "Put down the phone, Vernon. This is for your ears only." "What?" "You have what came in the bag, don't you?" "No." "I'll do you a deal. You needn't tell me a truth until I've told you a truth." The Right Honourable Vernon Short sits at his kitchen table looking at the bottle of Glenlivet. Sometimes all he really wants, has ever wanted, is an easy life. And he curses his father, his family, the tradition. "Tell me, what has she done?" "No matter what we tell each other, Vernon, this is our secret." Vernon nods. "They have made a threat against the baby inside her." "Good God!" Vernon leans forward, elbows on knees, blowing his cheeks out. "I am your only friend, Vernon. Nobody else would tell you. You have to put your faith in me. Imagine, after what has happened to her, what Catherine Killick will do if she knows you've been in touch with Leslie Crawford." "You don't know that." Staffe holds up the bag, wiggles it. "What was in it, Vernon?"
"How can I trust you?"
"I'm all you have." Staffe takes out his phone, scrolls through his numbers, knowing that the Home Secretary does not feature amongst its data. "I will talk to Catherine Killick." Vernon sits at the table, puts his fat, balding head in his little hands. His nails are perfectly manicured. "Tell me, Vernon." The would-be Minister for Enterprise gives the inspector a pitying, withering look. "How did you know about Leslie Crawford?" "I've told you my truth." Vernon reaches into the inside pocket of his jacket, hands 2 documents to Staffe. The first is dated the 2nd of May 1997, and is confirmation that Catherine Killick had been selected as candidate for East Hamlets. It is still, Staffe knows, the safest of safe seats. The second document is confirmation of an appointment for a procedure at the City Women's Clinic, and dated the 6th of May 1997. "Apparently, tennis players do it all the time, poor cow," says Vernon. "If she'd come clean before she was made up to the Cabinet, she would probably have been all right. But this bill of mine won't go away. You've seen the papers. If this gets out, she's finished." "Why wouldn't Leslie Crawford just publish this?" "It's an ace up the sleeve. Only one ace and only one sleeve. You wait for the chips to pile to their highest. You do well to remember that," says Vernon. "You mean Leslie wants her bill back?" "It's my bill, Inspector." Staffe realises that Vernon is already plotting ahead, seeing how this might come back to kiss him on both cheeks. "If the police reveal this information, it puts your bill back in play. It will destroy the Home Secretary, but you're okay. You've just lost a leg up in the next reshuffle." "I could never reveal this, you know that." Vernon nods at the papers in Staffe's hands. "How could I? A man of my integrity." Staffe meets Pulford at the end of Leslie Crawford Street in Southfields. He has picked up the long-term unclaimed car from the Pound, arranged by Johnbore, in case the Queen's men are surveilling on behalf of Cathy Killick. "I'm sick of the sight of this bloody street," says Pulford. "We wouldn't be here if you'd kept tabs on Crawford." Pulford looks exhausted, and Staffe says, "I tried to get Chancellor to take a turn, but she's nowhere to be seen." "Oh," says Pulford, sheepish. Staffe looks at him sidelong. "What's up?" "Nothing." "Call her, then." "I've tried. She's not answering." "We've worked together how long? 3 years? Long enough to know when you're lying." Pulford eases off the plastic lid to his designer coffee, nods in the direction of Crawford's house. "We've checked the ports and airlines and issued a trace on her car, but it seems to have disappeared completely." "Well, it could be anywhere. There's thousands of lockups in London alone. What about her family?" "A sister in Nottingham. Her father passed away 5 years ago, and her mother is in New Zealand." "What about her bank accounts?" "I've applied for a warrant to track her use of cards, but that's been blocked." "Who by?" Staffe knows there couldn't ever be a straight answer to that question. Never mind, don't push it. "Are we going in?" "Not a chance." Staffe looks at his weary sergeant and contemplates how much he should disclose about his conversation with Vernon Short. Decides that, in Pulford's case, ignorance is as blissful as this case will get. "Let's bide our time." "For what?" You don't know how many hours I've spent on this street." "Not enough," says Staffe. "Now tell me where Chancellor is." "I don't know." Pulford looks Staffe in the eye. "It's the truth. I'm worried about her." "Is this anything to do with Tommy Given?" "I didn't say anything about Given." "I know. When were you going to?" "We know he is something to do with Kerry Degg." "Smet told me. He's probably the one looking after Sean." Staffe opens up his newspaper, swallows away any temptation to tell his sergeant what Short spat up earlier in the day. He flicks through to the inside pages. Doesn't have to read far before he finds an article on the withdrawn bill. There is a third-string paragraph in the editorial about the Unborn Rights Bill, not commenting on the pros or cons, but casting aspersions as to the erosion of the democratic process which the withdrawal of the bill would imply. And there are 2 letters too, both demanding that the bill be resurrected, at least to present the argument to Parliament. "What's this, sir?" says Pulford, pointing up the street. 2 men in dark blue suits get out of a car outside Crawford's house. The car drives away, and the men march up to the front door, are let in without knocking. "She's not in," says Pulford. "I'm bloody sure of it." "I don't doubt it, Sergeant." "Who are they?" "The good guys," says Staffe. "We could follow them," says Pulford. "If they find something, and it leads them to her, we could—" "Forget it. They'd have us before we got to the South Cirque." The good news, which Staffe keeps to himself, is that Leslie Crawford is, without doubt, involved with Kerry Degg and Zoe Bright, as well as Cathy Killick, according to the most informed people in the land. And Tommy Given too, apparently. "Get hold of Chancellor, Sergeant. Tell her to call me straight away, day or night." "19. Staffe puts on his mask. Through the glass, hatched with reinforcing wire, he watches the 2 nurses leaning over baby Grace's cot. The plastic bubble is gone. She will live. The fair nurse looks up and catches his eye. She smiles and immediately whispers something to her friend, dark and altogether more serious. The fair nurse comes out, extends her hand, says, "I'm Nurse Natalie. I haven't seen your DC Chancellor recently. You must tell her to come. Grace is going to be fine. Just a case of building up her strength, getting her ready for the big bad world." Nurse Natalie puts her hand on Staffe's arm. "Keep your mask on. Go see her." "Is it okay?" He nods through the glass towards the other nurse, doting over Grace. "That's only Eve." And she chuckles, makes a zipping motion with her finger and thumb across her mouth, then pats Staffe on the back and goes on her merry way. Staffe stands beside Eve. She smells of crisp laundry and fine soap. She looks up at him and smiles, barely moving her mouth. Turns back to Grace and sighs, happily, like a freshly sated child. "I've been away," says Staffe. "Up north." "Nice for you. Any burlesque up there?" "I'm not that big a fan." "You could have fooled me." The baby has colour in her cheeks now, and tiny circular plasters on her wrists and arms, where once there were tubes. She looks straight above her, blinks. Staffe wonders what she makes of the world. "She can't see." "Not properly," says Eve. Her voice is brittle at its edge. "Poor thing." Eve looks up at him again, shifts her body. Her eyes glisten. "It's normal. She'll see the shadow of you." She looks down and up at him. "But not your hair or your face." "If only she could talk," says Staffe. Grace kicks her leg, makes a grumpy expression of her face. "She wants something," he says. Eve reaches for the board, hooked on the foot of the cot. Almost feeding. Will she know she has no mother? I'm afraid she'll know more than you'd want her to know. You ask strange questions. Eve looks at Staffe a third time, inquiringly. He says, she looks unhappy. Will you feed her? Not my job. They each look at the baby, watching her kick her legs and blink at the ceiling. After a while, Grace becomes less grumpy, and Staffe even thinks she smiles. Whatever it is, something has passed. Something better has replaced it. One day she will know that she has no mother, and slowly, surely, he feels the full weight of the passing of Kerry. And he knows he must find Sean, must discover what dragged this baby's mother below ground and into the dark. You look done in, says Eve. He laughs. This is me on a good day. This is a very good day. You should celebrate, says Staffe. Eve looks sad and turns back to the baby. It is as if suddenly she is alone in the room. You have someone to celebrate with? Eve shrugs, and as she does, with her back to him, Staffe feels something between his heart and his stomach. It is a familiar, absent feeling that makes him sad and joyous. It makes his nerves jag. After a while, just watching the back of her, he says, My favourite place is just round the corner. We could... They make great sandwiches. Proper bread. I like the corned beef sandwich. To get the beef from an Argentinian restaurant is amazing. She turns round, looks unsure about him. I'm not hungry. Neither am I. But I'm partial to gin. Plymouth gin. It's just the place for Plymouth gin, he says. Eve touches her fingers to her lips and places her hand on Grace's cot as she leaves the room. It is precisely the same thing that Sean Degg had done. The baby is asleep now. What's wrong with you, son? Says Jumbo. Pulford stirs his tea, down in the station kitchen where the smell of microwave meals never quite fades to nothing. He has eaten a quarter of his biscuit, has been down here an hour. Jumbo pulls up a chair, says again, What's wrong? Pulford knows that John is the closest this place has to a trustworthy confidant, even though he's Staffe's mate. There's something I have to tell Staffe, but I can't. Try me. I've known him 15 years. Sometimes I'm sad enough to know how he thinks. Pulford laughs, keeps looking into his tea. He is sure the only person who will be involved in anything bad happening to Josie will be Tommy Given. Jumbo says, It's not to do with your habit. What? How do you know about that? Everybody knows, laughs Jumbo. A mist descends, and Pulford feels his hands move away from him, fists clench. We're all human, says Jumbo. Pulford can't believe his gambling problems are out of the bag. It's not that. Oh, lady problems. Well, she's a belter, if you ask me. What? Josie. I thought it was all over between you two, but I see she's not been around the last day or so. I'm worried about her, John. I'd worry too, son. She's gone. I mean, really gone. I'm sure she's in trouble. He puts his hands to his hair. Shit, John, I think we overstepped the mark. Staff's going to kill us. Me, at least. I'm going to have to see Tommy Given. Tommy Given? Christ, lad, what have you been fucking with? You don't want him on our patch. Pulford weighs up whether to tell Jumbo what he and Josie did up at the Archibalds. But he knows they don't yet have the evidence to nail down any relationship between Tommy Given and Sean Degg, or between Given and Kerry, let alone that Tommy might be the father of Kerry's children. John grabs hold of Pulford's arm and hoists him out of the chair. "You can tell me on the way." "The way where?" "If you're involved with old Tommy, I'm coming with you. Nothing like winding back the years. I'll need to change, though. This is a social call, right? It has to be." Jumbo smiles, which irons away the creases from all the reams of paper that are piling up beneath his desk. Suddenly, John looks 10 years younger. "Where's the other one?" says Anthony Bright. "What's his name? Wagstaff." "You'll be dealing with me now, Anthony," says Alicia Flint. "You will find Zoe, won't you? She's not—" Alicia Flint watches the doubt peter out into a wordless gaze. "We have to address the implications of what Inspector Wagstaff was asking you about Zoe." "I know!" Anthony Bright's hands clench into fists. He flinches as his stitches nip. Alicia Flint moves her seat away from Anthony, sits in silence. She waits, and waits. "I know your game," says Anthony. "If only we could ask Zoe if this is a game." "It was hard for her to be with me." He laughs. A paper bag laugh, sadness punching through. "Love, eh? That's a bastard. I thought when we were having the first baby it would change her, change us." "Did she see other people?" "I can't say no, not for sure. I didn't want to know. I still don't. She did love me, you know, once. I'm not a nutter. When we were at school, it was her who made the running. And again when she came back." "Was she seeing someone special, Anthony?" He shrugs. "What about Petal Broom?" He laughs. "That dyke! Jesus, no way!" Alicia Flint has checked all the numbers that Zoe called from her contract phone and the landline, and the calls logged to her extension at the university. Did she have 2 mobiles? 2? You ever had an affair, Anthony? "Ah," he says, "you don't know what it's like. We go months without, you know." What made Zoe want another baby? Anthony is ready for this question. It's the one that keeps him awake, and his response, as far as Alicia Flint can tell, is the unmodified truth. Our first baby, the one that died, was blocking us. Everything we did. Zoe wanted to do something with her life. That dead baby was stopping us. It was stopping her going forward. I knew she had to have another, and she had to have it with me. I said I'd love that baby and look after it no matter what happened, and I still will." He looks at the floor, puts the palms of his hands to his face, says through them, "I still fucking would, no matter." He looks up. "Said on the radio that baby in London's going to be fine. They saved her, that baby Grace." "But not the mother." "I asked if you're going to find her." "Did you force Zoe, Anthony?" "She was cruel to me. She made me feel like I was nothing." "And then the baby came." "Are you married?" says Anthony. "No, thank God. I have a child, though." "Oh, you reckon that's the best way?" "I need to know about the phone, Anthony. Zoe's other phone, the one with just the one number in it." He nods. "She loved her garden, you know. Always in it." Anthony laughs. "Check the bird table, checking the feed. It's springtime now. The little birdies have been pecking. She never knew I knew. How sad is that?" Nurse Eve has the rest of the afternoon off. She sips her Plymouth gin slowly. This is her second glass, and she has stretched the first tonic. April winks at Staffe from behind the bar of the Hand and Shears, gives a thumbs up. Eve can't see her. Staffe takes the drinks back to the tiny snug with the fire. "So, you've nothing to do with the dead baby," says Staffe. "Not directly. Eve shakes her head. I was in the hospital when she was admitted. I do some liaison work, but I'm in pre-nat. She smiles reservedly. I never drink in the afternoon. Well, there's cause for celebration. You're a bad influence. He spots her looking at his hands. He looks at hers. No significant rings. Her Claddagh ring is the right way up, if you're interested. It must be hard, working with expectant mothers. I bet you got some stories to tell. It gives you hope, no matter what the parents are like or how they carry on. Well, doesn't that make you worry, for the children, how to break the cycle? We make sure they're as healthy as they can be, give them the best shot, and I pray they rise above. Some of them do. You pray? I'm not religious. Are you? Staffe shakes his head and finishes his drink, wishes he could stay for another, but he needs to get back into Kerry's life. He needs to peer long and hard at Tommy Given now. I should get your number, he says. And why should you do that? Because I'm going to want to talk to you again. Really? For a blink of the eye, 2. Eve looks worried. And I might need to talk to you about Grace too. Aha. Her smile is broad, and her eyes sparkle in the fireglow. I barely know you. That's why you should give me your number. It's not something I do, not often. I don't ask often. I bet you don't. She finishes her drink, pulls on her coat, says, It's not a good time for me, thanks for the gin. Takes me back. Back where? Mainly a bad place. He watches her go, sees that April looks glum as she watches Eve leave, without so much as a backward glance. Staffe gets out his notebook, jots down names in a ring around the name Kerry. He writes Philip Ramone, Tommy Given, Bridget Lamb, John and Sheila Archibald. Then he flicks back through his notes, finds the name of the teacher from Kerry's poems, writes Trohe. Outside the circle he writes Eve. Leslie Crawford looks up at Nottingham Castle, across the Trent from the university lawns, and fondly remembers picnics here. She thinks back to her first tutorial group and pictures the students' faces. Clear as bells, and all girls for some reason. Her phone rings, and from the ringtone she knows immediately that it's the wrong phone. How could it be? Leslie scrambles in her bag and pulls out the bog-standard Nokia. The battery sounds as if it's about to die, and that name is on the screen. It makes Leslie want to shiver. The name is untrue now. It fades as the battery dies. Leslie walks towards the river, takes out the SIM card, although it only holds one name, and throws both the handset and the card into the waters, wondering who the hell was using Zoe's phone to call her.
End of Disc 4. Disc 5.
20. John Ball whistles when he sees Tommy Given's place, at the end of a 100-yard track and through a 5-bar gate. This is the posh side of Cobham. A breeze shimmers in the tall elms and yews, a dog barks. The house itself is old and stone, with low leaded windows and mullions. Out front are a new-plated Merc GL, an old and clearly rehabilitated Alpha Spider, and a knackered short-wheelbase Land Rover, with large mounted spots like frog's eyes and a horsebox hooked up. Round the side are 4 newly built stables in dressed stone. The dog bowls up, snarling. Some kind of bull terrier, with a head like an anvil and shoulders like hams, a tiny arse and slobbering chops. Pulford gasps, takes a step back, But John Ball goes down on one knee, as if meeting royalty, and pats the dog, slaps its shoulder, and holds its muzzle with both hands, playfully shaking it left and right. Pulford takes a step away as the dog howls with joy. "Not lost it, John." John stands up, and the dog jumps up at Pulford, snarling. "Sarge," whimpers Pulford. "All right, Tommy. Long time," says John Ball. "Good for both of us." "Sarge," calls Pulford. John Ball clicks his fingers and pats his thigh, and the dog comes to him. "It's not the dog that bites," says John Ball. He stabs a finger at Tommy Given. "This one'll poison you." "Very funny," says Tommy. He looks at Pulford, as if he might recognise him. "Not so funny is why you're here." "We need to eliminate you is all," says John. "Just tell us where you were last night, Tommy." "Why should I?" "Let's not make a fuss in front of your family." "Fuck that, John. You can ask my wife. I was in the Duke's Head early doors. There's 6 of my mates can vouch for that, and the bar staff." "But just your wife after that?" says Pulford, looking down at the dog, who growls up at him. "And my daughter. And the guy from the Thai restaurant. He came round with a takeaway at 8:30. Why? What's up?" Tommy turns his back, walks away around the side of the house, through a loggia with honeysuckle climbing all over it. He pauses, takes a bud between his big thumb and forefinger. "These are too early. I don't know what's going on in the world." John Ball and Pulford follow him. The dog has its head against Pulford's trouser bottoms. A woman appears from a conservatory at the back of the house. A swimming pool is covered with blue tarpaulin. She wears a caftan and has her auburn hair up in a careless bun. She is beautiful, delicate, and with a young child. She says, "Hello," in a foreign accent, probably French. "This is Sabine," says Tommy. He says her name in a perfect, soft accent. "These men want to know where I was last night," he continues, in his thick and wide London accent. "Aha, like the old days," Sabine laughs. Her voice is fine as porcelain. "You was here, with me and our daughter." "I didn't know," says John. "Congratulations." "Giselle is napping," she says. "Maybe next time," says Tommy. "I'm not so sure you're telling the whole truth," says Pulford. "You were with my DC." Tommy nods at his dog, who jumps up at Pulford. Pulford steps back, bangs into the loggia. Sabine laughs, and Tommy looks at her adoringly. Tommy says, "Come in, and I'll show you my receipt from the Thai. Then you can be on your way, once you've told me what I'm supposed to have done." John Ball smiles at Sabine, says, "That won't be necessary." Tommy whispers to Pulford, "One word from me, and that dog will rip out your throat." Pulford wants to tell Tommy that he saw his car last night, that he knows exactly where he was. But he bows to the better part of valour. As they make their way back to the car, John Ball says, "It looks like you're going to have to tell Staffe we appear to have mislaid a detective constable." Anton Trohe is biscuit thin. A ginger tom in his lap and a long, thin joint hanging from the corner of his mouth. "I am police, you know," says Staffe. The joint jiggles and the ash spills as Anton talks. His eyes are vague and watery, his speech lazy. "I take it for pain." "Pain from what?" asked Staffe. Beyond Anton, Through the bay window of his first-floor flat, a thick band of Brighton's beach lies between the balustraded promenade and the sunless, cloudless sky, the colour of kaolin and morphine.
"I'm dying," he says, matter of fact. "Is this about Kerry?"
"You remember her still?"
"You know, I'm amazed. I don't remember more about my children. But you couldn't forget Kerry. She demanded to be known. Not much to look at, but you couldn't take your eyes off her. She had mischief, you know. It made you want to be her. She didn't give a toss."
"And that's what Sean saw in her, is it?"
"I remember him. Some of the teachers were concerned at one stage, but he wouldn't harm her."
"He preyed on a schoolgirl almost half his age."
"It wasn't like that. I knew Sean. I was in a theatre group. Just did the pubs round Islington and Camden, you know. It was just before I left teaching, and he was good to me."
"Because you were Kerry's teacher?"
"It was she who chased him."
Anton Trohe coughs. He doubles up and holds his ribs, wheezing, reaching for a glass and sipping, holding his throat as he swallows, slowly leaning back, resuming his position.
"She was a minx. Before Sean, there was a man who'd pick her up from school in a car, but she set her sights on Sean Degg the minute he started seeing her sister."
"Bridget? Sean Degg went out with Bridget Lamb?"
"Lamb? Oh, she got married then. I always knew them as the Kilbride girls. It made us laugh. Kerry would kill the bride to get to the groom, even if it was her own sister."
"She got her man," says Staffe. "And this man who had come to pick Kerry up from school, was he a gangster? Do you know Tommy Given, Anton?"
"I am dying, Inspector, but I don't have a death wish."
Enough said, thinks Staffe. "Bridget has done very well for herself, living in Surrey with a doting husband," he says.
"And children?"
"She can't have them."
"It wasn't always thus."
"What?"
"Ask Sean."
"Bridget had a baby with Sean?"
"She left school as soon as she started to show. I heard she went the whole term and lost it right at the end."
"Is that when Sean left her?"
"God only knows. But the minute Bridget left school, he was there at the school gates for Kerry. It was summer, and Kerry never came back after the holidays. She could have done anything she wanted to, you know."
"I read her work."
"That's how you got hold of me."
Anton looked proud. Staffe tries to work out how old he is. Reckons they must be the same age, even though Anton's drawn and pallid face is thickly riven with lines, and his hair is all shorn away. His eyes are dark, hollow as two halves of an eggshell. "If there's anything you want to tell me, anything you remember about Kerry and Bridget and Sean, about Tommy Given, you should give me a ring." Staffe stands, hands Anton his card, and laments the life unlived. He makes his way back out through the book-lined hallway, floor to ceiling with thoughts and memories, stories and theories. How many has Anton read, he wonders? How many unread? Lying on its back, atop a line of Bruce Chatwin's, is Beloved. When he was done with Anton, Staffe had stomped down Brighton's pebble beach to the shore. It was heavy going, and as the pebbles rattled and shifted beneath him, his muscles had begun to burn. He couldn't remember the last time he had some decent exercise, so he had walked all the way to the pier. When he got there, the sun was disappearing down beyond the Playboy beach houses that stand high, silhouetted on the pale roads to Hove. He treated himself to oysters in the Regency, and was pleasantly surprised that the place was much the same as he remembered it. Then he drove back against the traffic, took a call from Pennington, who had asked where he was going. He told him, and the DCI said he was to steer clear of Tommy Given. Pennington had received a call from the Met. Tommy was their man. Always had been, and it would stay that way. Now Staffe puts down his pint and looks out of the enormous plate-glass window onto Harrow Road, the walled enclosure of Wormwood Scrubs in the background. Each time a lorry trundles past, the window rattles. "Tell me what your deal is with Given, Smith," says Staffe, pushing away his empty glass. Smethurst wraps his fat fingers around his own glass and takes a mouthful. A third of the bitter disappears. "Do you really think that's how we operate?" "He knows Kerry Degg. He helped to get a residency at one of Philip Ramone's places." "Why not have a chat with him?" "I've been warned off." Staffe unfolds a piece of A4. As he reads from it, he wonders if Tommy Given might somehow be in the Met's pay. The biggest grass in all of London town. He did 6 months of a 3-year in 1978 when he was just a pup. Since then, he's only been up in court twice, and neither went to trial. He's one of the nastiest bastards in all London, and we haven't got so much as a DNA swab. You've got his dabs. That won't prove he's the father of a murdered woman's child. I should be careful who you say that in front of. He's got some mighty fine lawyers, so I hear. I thought we were mates, Smet. And you'd be right. As long as you're in City and I'm at the Met, it'll stay that way. Smet laughs, but the truth is raw enough. They spent 6 years together and didn't always see eye to eye. Each of them knows that either would help the other at the drop of a switchblade, so long as it didn't harm themselves. All I need is a whisper where Sean Degg is. Forget Tommy Given. I'll find some other way to cook that bloody goose. You must have heard something. You tried Ross Dennis? Staffe says nothing, wondering how Smet would know about Ross Dennis. He's on Staffe's patch, supposedly. All Staffe has to work out is, has Smet slipped up, or did he mean to let him know he'd been told about Dennis? He watches Smet finish his pint and tug at his belt, look at his watch. Smet purses his lips and makes the smallest shake of his head. Shouldn't you be concentrating on that Crawford woman? It's in the papers again, you know. That bill of Vernon Short's is on the rebound. Now there's a real fish to fry. What are you doing here? Says the nurse, Eve, to Staffe, in the reception of City Royal's antenatal unit. She puts on a stern face and looks around, as if he might be tarnishing her in some way, but when she sees they have the place to themselves, she allows herself a smile. I don't have your number, remember? Something tells me this isn't a social call. Does it have to be one thing or the other? What do you want from me? The time you spent in the hospital with Grace. Did anybody else come to see her? Well, there was the policewoman, the pretty woman who found her. Anybody else? Well, the police had someone there the whole time to keep the press away, they said. There were other mothers there, of course, and their families. You should ask Natalie. The other nurse, is she a friend of yours? Eve laughs. More than that. We're from the same part of Yorkshire. We're in the same hostel when we first came down to London. Yorkshire, eh? Says Staffe. Which village? A place called Appletruick, says Eve. Aptrick, he says, smiling. That's what the locals call it. You've been there? Staffe recalls a weekend in the Yorkshire Dales with Sylvie. "You're not here to chat about the Dales," says Eve, turning towards him. Her mouth is set, but her eyes sparkle. "I'm here to coax something out of you." "Anything in particular?" "Kerry's sister. She's called Bridget. And nothing alike, if I remember. I was with her, but you should ask Natalie. She made Natalie pray with her. I saw them together, kneeling by Grace's cot." "Did she come more than once?" "Not that I know. She was stuck up. I didn't like to think of Grace as being her niece. That sounds awful, doesn't it? The father, he looked right with the child, but I didn't take to that sister. Something seemed wrong, even though you could tell she loved them." "Loved them?" "You had to look hard, but yes, she loved them all right, the baby and the mother." Staffe hands her his card, then puts a hand on Eve's shoulder, squeezes it gently. "Thank you. You've been a great help." "I don't think so." "Let me buy you dinner." "I can buy my own dinner, thank you." "Let me eat it with you." Eve laughs and flicks his nose with the card he had given her. "Maybe I'll call you. Maybe you can pay, you can afford it." "What?" "I spoke to your friend, the policewoman. I'm not sure how happy she'd be, you chatting me up." "Am I?" "Have you taken her out to dinner, Inspector Wagstaff?" This time, as she goes, she looks over her shoulder. Her eyes sparkle and her teeth show pearly white. He watches her go and he wonders what the hell she was talking to Josie about. And come to think of it, where has she got to? He calls Jumbo, but he's not in the station. Jumbo's always in the station. What's happening to the world? 21. Sean Degg looks down on the Regent's Canal. From here he can see everybody who comes. From the bus stops up and down the New North Road and along the towpath. The only blind spot is out back, through next door's garden. Because of the fixed frosted window in the bathroom, he can't see next door's garden properly. Next door the other way is just fine. He knows that if they are to find him, they'll come the back way, whether they're the filth or the filthier. They'll know what they're doing. Does he have the stomach for this? Can he dig in and fight to his last breath? He's got Grace now, but she seems a million miles away. That kind of a life, one they might forge together the way he's always dreamed, seems impossible. He looks at the photo he has of her on his phone. Sean goes to the fridge. He has a half-drunk can of Tennant's left and a swallow of vodka in the bottom of the bottle. He has 8 tins of big soup and 2 loaves in the freezer and a multi-pack of Jaffa cakes. He has a 1/4 ounce of dried-out drum and 2 spliffs short of an eighth. He wonders if he should phone. He's going mad in here, but they told him not to call. It's a funny feeling, being nowhere, having no one. He doesn't register on any kind of radar, which ought to be a good thing. Sean goes through to the back bedroom, hangs out of the window and checks next door's garden. The days are drawing out, and the sky is hues of orange and coral where the sun is trying to set, way behind Canary Wharf's oblongs and prisms of glinting glass. And then he realises that by hanging out of the window he isn't helping himself. So he slams the sash frame down, pulls the catch across, and picks up his phone. His finger hovers over the green, but he chucks it onto the bed and counts his cash. He's only got 12 quid left, and he can't go to the machine. He can't leave that kind of a trail, not yet. Not until it all plays out. He doesn't know quite what that means. He waits for the sun to drop, and the last of the dog walkers to drift away from the canal, and he puts on his coat. He hasn't been out for 2 or is it 3 days? As he pulls the door behind him, Sean's fingers tremble and his bowels shift. He feels loose inside, feels kind of alive. Staffe takes the record from his turntable. It was his father's LP and not exactly his cup of tea. He prefers the later works, Miles and Coltrane, Mingus and Ornette. But he can see now, hear now, that his father was right about Ellington being the master. He puts the needle back to the first track and listens again, this time intent upon following the sweeping lines of Jimmy Hamilton's clarinet. But by the time he has popped his coffee back in the microwave for 10 seconds and settled back into his American spoonback, his mind has flitted across Eve and all the way back through to the moment he first set eyes on Kerry Degg down in the tunnel. The tendrils from this case go all over the place. He needs something to focus on, like a magnifying glass put to the sun that burns a hole when the clouds roll away. He picks up the data sheets for Zoe and Kerry, and Kathy Killick, too, looks at the thinly populated central core of the Venn diagram. The only thing that unifies the women is that they were 24 weeks pregnant when they disappeared, or were threatened in the case of the Home Secretary. Jimmy Hamilton's clarinet meanders. Occasionally and fleetingly, he swims with the melody. Staffe looks at the data reports for the 3 women, then works his way through the list of names that are in his head, looking for connections. A job for Pulford, rerunning the data fields for everyone in this case, victims, witnesses, and suspects alike. The orchestra swoons and rolls, and Ellington picks out strands of the melody with a few choice piano chords. Just so much that you can follow him, like someone almost out of sight, giving chase in the half-light of dense woods. Staffe reaches for the telephone, to tell Pulford to spread further the data matches, but as his fingers touch the phone, it rings. Inspector. It is a woman's voice, calm, lofty, distinguished. He recognises it immediately from the radio. Mrs. Killick, you shouldn't call me here. Your people won't be happy. The line is fine. We checked. She pauses, and he suspects her hand is over the mouthpiece, thinks she might be talking to somebody else. This isn't an official call, you understand. We are not having this conversation. Staffe considers what he discovered of her past from Vernon Short. I need this case to be solved, Inspector. The other women disappeared at my stage, and as you know, there are people who want Vernon's bill back. I can't do as much as I would like, as you know. Can you arrange for me to have access to Leslie Crawford's house? What I'm about to tell you is absolutely confidential, Inspector. You shouldn't tell me, then. I have to. Her voice cracks. She lowers her voice, almost whispering. They have been in touch again. They said that they have no choice. Was it a man or a woman? A woman. Was it taped? No. And did you recognise the voice? No. I'd like to say it was her, that Crawford woman, but I can't. Kathy Killick's voice is tremulous. Tell me about Vernon Short. What might the future hold for him? The phone falls silent. Staffe tries to imagine what the scene might be on the other end of the line. Eventually, she says, There's someone who could make way for him. There's always somebody wanting to spend more time with their family. Staffe is quite dizzy at what is at stake here, and although he knows it might not advance his own cause, he feels the compulsion to tell Kathy Killick what he knows Vernon knows. Mrs. Killick. Yes. He falters. Have you offered Vernon a cabinet post? I can't say any more. She laughs weakly, trying to break the tension. I'd have to kill you. Can you get me into Leslie Crawford's house? How might that help? Well, why call me? You have your own people, asked Staffe. I will arrange what you want, Inspector. Mrs. Killick. Yes? Nothing. He hangs up. The record has come to its end, and the needle scratches away in the runaway grooves at the end of the final track. As Staffe flips the record over, there is a knock at the door, and he checks his watch. Who could it be at this time of night? Pulford looks sheepish, and immediately Staffe knows that the news must be bad. He invites his sergeant in, and they sit opposite each other at the kitchen table in the flat which, earlier in the year, they had shared. It's Josie, sir. You know we were on to Tommy Given. We've a problem with that. He's the Mets man. Anything to do with Given, we have to pass through Pennington. We didn't know that. Pulford looks at his hands. He can't keep his fingers still. What's happened? I don't know, sir. I've not seen Josie since... Since when? You know Josie spoke to Cello Delaney, that friend of Kerry's. What's happened? Well, she told us about Tommy Given, and so Josie, went to see the foster parents, the Archibalds. And I went to Given's local. Josie wound the Archibalds up, and they phoned Given. I followed him. We wanted to see him going into their house, that's all. It's the connection we need. And they saw you following them? I don't think so. And where was Josie? That's it, sir. I don't know. You haven't seen her since then? We think it's Tommy Given, sir. We? John came with me. With you? To Given's spot down in Surrey. My God, Pulford! Staffe stands up, paces the kitchen. What have you done about it? I've checked all the A&Es and I've called Josie's folks. Pulford looks up at Staffe, appears to be close to tears. I don't know what to do, sir. It's a right mess. Staffe sits heavily in his chair. Have you knocked on in the Archibald Street? Not yet. First thing in the morning, Pulford. And in the meantime? When was the last time you phoned a DCI at home? Call it staff development. And Staffe tosses Pulford his mobile. Then you can do something constructive. I take it you're in no mood for sleep. Sean puts down the phone, fearing the worst. He shouldn't have even come out tonight. From the phone box, he looks along the canal, then back up at the window of the flat he's holed up in. You would never guess. There is no outward clue as to who or what might be within. Now, though, he's out. It is done. He may as well make the most of it. In the off-licence on the New North Road, he counts his change again, keeps his phone money separate, in a coin bag, then gets himself a quarter bottle of an obscure brand of vodka with an implausibly Eastern Bloc name. All set, he slips in the side door of the Nags. There's only two others in, sitting separately and each sucking hard on the house doubles. One chases it down with a half, the other a pint. The place smells of toilet. The Pogues track on the CD keeps jumping. It's the one about whiskey on Sunday and tears on your cheeks. He thinks it's called The Majestic Shannon. Kerry used to love it. Kerry. Nothing seems real. He looks around the place and tries to think of something not Kerry. Tries to block out the sound of Shane's cracked and bleeding throat. It's a place you'd come if you took pubs but left people. It suits, down to the ground, for tonight. Sean orders the premium lager. The barman weighs him up as if he might be a threat, and when Sean says, "You all right?" he smiles and nods, looking as if he's decided he knows Sean won't present a problem. The phone goes, and the barman goes out back, and Sean, deft as a thief, slurps a sixth of his pint, pulls the vodka from his pocket, and glugs half the quarter bottle of vodka into his pint. It comes up nicely to the rim, and Sean smiles at a job well done. One of the others catches him at it and gives him a look of admiration. Sean takes a drink and immediately feels the full whack. It fuels a softening inside him, and a vial of optimism unfurls. He settles back in his stool and watches Sky Sports News with its looping tales of sacked managers and subcontinental cricket. The barman comes back in, eats his freebie chili at the bar. He winks at Sean, as if to say he knows his sort. When he turns away, Sean empties the rest of the vodka in and takes a slug. It is almighty powerful now, and his eyes water a little. When he gets towards the bottom, he orders a half. Hears the words of his request tumble softly into each other. The barman smiles, but instead of pouring a half, he takes the pint from in front of Sean and fills it right up. Just asks him for the 180 for the half. Sean begins to picture a better outcome. The prospect of it flows slowly in his blood. He wonders if he might approach Philip Ramone. Technically, he is due a commission still. Kerry's contract had been signed. And he wonders also if simply considering this makes him a bastard. He thinks of Grace, knows he has to provide for her somehow. God knows how if he's holed up like this, but this can't be forever. If Philip coughed up, and he could get to Grace, he would take her out of London altogether until things settle down, which they will. He tries to remember who had assured him everything would settle down. His head is fuzzed. Soon his pulse quickens, his mood darkens. He needs another drink. Just one. He takes a final and almighty gulp of his strange brew, feels the stool beneath him waver. The fellow who is chasing with pints sups up and heads for the door, pulling a fag from his black pack of cheapo cigs. Sean looks for the other punter, but he's gone. Now he's all on his own. He looks at his pile of change and thinks he hasn't quite got enough for a final half. He doesn't want to leave just yet. He could dip into his phone money, his lifeline. The barman says, "Another?" "I'm not sure." Sean looks at his pile. The barman raises a finger to his lips and says, "Pay me next time." Sean necks the remainder of his pint in one go, but has to stop himself gagging on the viscosity of the booze. It's like winning on a long shot after a steward's. The barman hands across his glass, then goes out back again, leaving Sean to his good fortune, his head soft and his heart lifted. As soon as the barman goes, a hand appears upon Sean's shoulder. It feels neither unusual nor familiar, and Sean recalls that the last time he touched or was touched by another human was days, maybe a week ago. He had pressed the sole of his boot to the wrist of that prostrate newsagent. "Hello, Sean," says his new companion. "We should go. I have what you asked for." "Why don't you stay? Just for one." "We can't be seen. Come on. There's plenty where we're going." Pulford taps away on his laptop at Staffe's kitchen table, while Staffe ploughs through the case notes and statements, calling out slivers of information for his sergeant to enter. The computer does the hard bit, and Staffe takes a break, cuts them each a slab of Cornish yarg and a chunk of bread, serves it up with spoonfuls of spring chutney and a handful of salad leaves growing on his windowsill. "Do you want a glass of beer?" he asks. "Wait," says Pulford, peering into the laptop screen. "Leslie Crawford went to Sidney Sussex College, Cambridge, from 1984 to 1987. "Same as Vernon Short," says Staffe. "Hang on. I need to style these correctly, or the computer won't pick up the match." He types in Cambridge, then the dates, then the college, into 3 separate fields, just as he had done for Vernon Short and Zoe Bright. "I knew that. I'm sure I knew that from somewhere," says Staffe. "Am I going mad?" "No. Vernon was there 8 years earlier. They wouldn't have met. When can I look at this? On paper, I mean, not on that damn thing. We're nowhere near done, sir. Staffe wants to bomb straight up to Cambridge, to talk to the tutors who might still be there, who knew Crawford and Short. Absently, he reads out more details regarding Leslie Crawford, pausing, habitually now, for Pulford to input the data. As he talks, his mind wanders. First house, Argyle Street, Wandsworth, 1992 to 1998. Next house, Paternoster House, Battersea, 1998 to 2005. Then her Southfields Place from 2008 till now.
What did she do between 05 and 08? Says Pulford.
Staffe flicks through his notes, then through Josie's jottings on the photocopied cuttings. I don't know. He flicks back and forth, loses himself, half his mind still on the Sydney-Sussex connection.
She was at university.
I'm sure she was, says Pulford. Here, give it to me. Staffe pats his sergeant on the shoulder and looks at the dense grid of rows and columns and text, wondering if they are helping or hindering. 22. Josie is cold, and the rough blanket scratches her legs. They have brought her a cup of tea and some cold toast, spread with bright yellow marge. She wolfs it down, then bangs at the door again, complaining that they haven't made the phone call yet. Her head thumps, and her mouth is still dry. She feels as if she could drink a bathful of water and still be thirsty. She slumps to the floor, runs her hands over the rough scabs on her knees. They said she had tried to glass a police officer in a nightclub, hence the treatment. She skews round and uses the tray to bang on the door for 5-10 minutes. She loses sense of time, but eventually the metal plate slides across the spy hole, and she recognises the dark eyes of the sergeant who brought her food. I'm sorry about what happened, but I want my phone call, Sarge. You've had it. Who did I call? Your dad. Josie doesn't get on with her dad. Her dad is a treacherous, selfish, vain pig. She hasn't called him in a year. She knows they're lying. She brings her knees up to her breasts, holds herself, and wonders what state she must have been in. But the door opens. The duty sergeant stands over her. What did you say? What did I say to him, Sarge? I'm curious. We don't get on, me and my father. You called me Sarge. I'm one of you. I'm one of us, I mean. I told you that. Can I have some water? Not according to your ID. Who am I? The sergeant crouches down, says, You are off your tits. You punched out a 19-year-old girl and you tried to glass one of my WPCs. It took 4 officers to get you out of that club. She looks down at what she's wearing, tries to cover herself up. She puts her hand on the sergeant's knee and twists round, looks into his eyes, smiling. Then you should charge me. What?
Sounds like a Section 89.
What? Well, surely you know your 96 Act. Or maybe she wasn't in uniform, so you're worried about mitigation. Well, at least hit me with a Section 39. That would be the 88 Act. Christ, says the sergeant. What the hell did they give me? Josie stands up. I need to be tested. She pulls down her skirt, but its lycra content is too high and it recoils. Let's go. You're going nowhere, young lady. What? I've had the wool pulled over too many times to fall for that. Call Ledengate and ask for Sergeant Jumbaugh or D.S. Pulford and check me out. Tell them what I look like. Is that really what you want? Says the sergeant, allowing a smile, and closing the door behind him as he goes. It is early morning, and although the sun is bright, it is still low in the sky. A pewter dew lies across Thames Ditton's green, Staffe is on his way down into Surrey, whilst Pulford organises the knock along the Archibald Street. Seeing as how he was on the A3, and bearing in mind what Anton Trohe had told him about the Kilbride sisters, he thought it only polite to call in on Bridget. And he had wanted to pull off the A3 to see if the knackered blue Beamer followed him. Looking around now, he can see no trace. Is he becoming paranoid? A frost had missed by the barest degree, and the house of Malcolm and Bridget Lamb is pretty as a picture. Pretty as a picture of a chocolate box. Staffe knocks on the door, and the sight of him is enough to bring a frown to Malcolm Lamb's fresh face. Nonetheless, Malcolm can't suppress a whole life of decency, and he invites Staffe in. Bridget is in the living room, sitting in her pyjamas with her knees tucked up in a bergère chair beneath a standard lamp and flicking through a soft furnishings magazine. She says, "It would be nice if you'd called. I suppose it's one of your tricks, to catch people unawares." "Why would I need tricks?" "I told you what I know." "You didn't tell me you went to see Grace." "I hadn't been when I saw you." "I can check the dates, and I will. You'd want me to check, wouldn't you, to find the person who killed your sister?" Bridget removes her spectacles and closes Country Home. She sighs. "You obviously have something to say." Turning to Malcolm, she says, "You have to prepare, love. You can leave us." "Where are you going?" says Staffe. "He has a church group," says Bridget. "Druggies." "They are lost," says Malcolm. Once Malcolm has gone, Staffe says, "I went to see Anton Trohe. Mr. Trohe to you, I guess." "Kerry was his favourite." "And you were Sean Deggs until Kerry came along." "He was a predator." "He loved her, though, didn't he?" "I judge a tree by its fruit, Inspector. I don't see much love in that fruit." "This isn't the best analogy, is it, Bridget?" Staffe perches on the edge of a library chair, clasps his hands together. "Anton Trohe told me you were expecting a baby while you were at school." "It was a long time ago." "But you must still resent Sean, leaving you in that state." "I was weak for a while. Time heals." "It doesn't heal everything, though, does it?" Staffe wants to say more, but holds himself back, speculating that it must have been the denouement of her pregnancy that had wreaked some kind of havoc on Bridget, preventing her from being a mother now and forever. She says, "I have learned to trust in God's will." "It must have been hard for you not to hate the two of them." "Hatred is not in my repertoire. I can only live as good a life as I can, and I've been rewarded with more love than poor Kerry ever brought on herself." "Tell me about when you went to the hospital to see Grace." For a moment Bridget looks befuddled, as if she's trying to remember that day, what she might have said and to whom. "I can't remember. I was upset. Surely you can understand that." "I'm trying to understand why you wouldn't tell me that you once carried Sean Degg's child." "It was a long time ago." "What did you see in Sean?" "I was a different person." She forces a smile. "I see it as a step on the road to salvation." "Has he been in touch since I last saw you?" "Why would he?" Bridget looks confused. "You're his sister-in-law. He's an only child and his parents are dead. His children are in care. You're as close a relative as the poor man has." "They're not his children." "Grace is." Bridget bites her lip and her eyes glint. A weaker person might show a tear, but all Bridget does is open her magazine. Without looking at him, she says, "I don't care for the way this is going. She was my sister, you know, my damned sister." "I'll show you out," says Malcolm, standing in the doorway, with a light Mac over his arm, even though it's a fine day. "Please, there's only so much she can take in one go." Staffe nods. On the way out, he looks back at Bridget. She's staring into nowhere, as if she can see something that is coming to get her. At the door, he says, "This won't go away, not unless we can get hold of Sean." "He is still missing?" asks Malcolm. "Without trace. Anything you or Bridget can tell us, and I wouldn't have to be round here so much." "He won't be able to stay away from the babies, surely." "Babies?" "Oh, you know," says Malcolm, opening the door. The day floods in. "He's got the others, too." Miles and Maya aren't babies. Perhaps they are to Malcolm. Babies, Staffe thinks, and he feels the gap in Bridget's life. And Malcolm's, too. Pulford looks through the spy hole, scarcely believing what he sees. "That's her," he says. "For fuck's sake, what have you done to her?" Josie sits on the bed below the high barred window, shivering. Her knees are scabbed, her hands red raw, the knuckles scuffed. She's wearing a thin red dress that barely reaches the top of her legs, and the bodice of the dress is torn, revealing a black bra. Her makeup is smudged and smeared. Her hair looks big and brittle and broken. "Get her some clothes," Pulford says to the WPC behind him. "Where from?" "I don't care. She's one of us. Why the hell have you let her stay in this state? Let me in, and then get her some clothes and a hot meal." "She had a go at one of our WPCs, tried to glass her so you can get fucked. She's a right bitch." "Get her the bastard clothes." Pulford glares at her and hisses, "Have a word with your Sarge. He's in on the picture." When the bolt shoots and the door swings open, Josie sees Pulford and gasps. Pulford wraps his arms around her. Gradually, her body becomes less taut. He remembers when they were briefly together. She smells of drink and stale cigarette smoke. She doesn't smoke. He says, "What did they do to you?" "What did they do to me?" she asks. "You were drinking cider, strong cider, according to the shop owner, by the Archibald's house. You were supposed to make yourself scarce, remember?" "Not really." "Then you ended up in a place called Scotty's out in Southend." "Scotty's? Never heard of it. Am I in trouble?" "We need to get you looked at. Tested, you know, and see what they gave you." "Did I do what they said?" "You laid out a girl in the nightclub, but she's okay. And you went for a WPC." "Oh, my God." "But we need to know how you got there. Can you remember anything?" Josie shakes her head. "I got the cider, I remember that. I was waiting." She looks up at him. "I was waiting for you, and then you drove by. I wanted to wave, David." Josie surrenders to him again, says over and over again, "You should have looked," like a little girl. Suddenly, Pulford lets go of her. "Oh, God!" She looks up afraid. "What is it?" "I've got to call Staffe. He's on his way to see Tommy Given. He's going to shake it out of him. Wait here." "Where would I go?" she says, curling up on the bed, a soft smile smudged on her face now. By the time Pulford gets to reception, she is asleep. Staffe recognises the type immediately. The suit is blue, and his eyes are covered by a pair of wayfarers. Leaning against Staffe's Peugeot by the green, the man flicks his cigarette into the gutter and stands erect. "What have I done now?" says Staffe. "I'm taking you to Southfields." "You're not. Not now." "I was told you were desperate to have a poke around." "I am, but I'm going the other way." "We'll take your car. It's best." "I told you I'm—" The bonnet of his own car, and the powdery sky, and then his bonnet again, swirl. Then his face is cold, on the metal of his Peugeot, and the side of his face is compressed. He's looking across the bonnet towards the green, and a searing pain is shooting down his shoulders and through his head. He tries to move, but he can't. Now he feels pressure behind his ears, and he thinks he's going to black out. Just as he does, it is as if he's landing on feathers, and when he opens his eyes, he's in the back of his own vehicle, and the houses around the green are moving, as if he were on a fairground horse. There is a deep voice alongside him, telling him he has a call. As they come up over the cusp of Kingston Hill, Staffe has recovered his bearings, has absorbed the news that Josie Chancellor is being released from prison and that charges will not be pressed. And he's been told by Pennington that he is under no circumstances to go west along the A3. Tommy Given, for now, is still off limits. "I take it Crawford won't be there," he says to the man in the blue suit alongside him. He can't work out if that is the one who assaulted him or whether it was the driver. They both wear Wayfarer sunglasses. "We'll catch up with her," says the passenger, clearly taking her continued absence to heart. Staffe wonders whether his companions know anything of the ace that Leslie Crawford has put up Vernon's short sleeve. And is Leslie Crawford necessarily behind the threat to Cathy Killick? Once in Southfields, the men in suits remain outside, and Staffe is given the run of the house. He can have as long as he likes. The kitchen is in keeping with the unspoiled early Edwardian ethos. What was once the scullery still sports a gleaming, renovated black range, and it is clear that Leslie Crawford has lavished much love on the place. Working his way from the larder, round the cupboards and sideboards, Staffe finds nothing of interest at all and moves to the dining room, then the lounge. It appears that Leslie Crawford keeps all her paperwork in an inlaid Deco secrétaire. She maintains a modest credit balance in her current account and has the maximum in her ISA account. Her income seems to flow from a trust and yields her £2,000 per month. A copy of the trust document shows the estate is that of a Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Crawford, and that Leslie has been the recipient for 5 years. Staffe checks in the airing cupboard and under the beds, at the back of her drawers, and every level of her 3 wardrobes. There is not an item out of place in this pristine and orderly house, not a thing to suggest that Leslie Crawford has any connection with any political cause, nor even the faintest interest in the plight of the unborn population. There is an invitation bearing the embossed crest of Sydney Sussex College, inviting her to a Victorian Society dinner at the beginning of June, and from the tick she has struck through RSVP, it would seem she has accepted. Staffe takes note. Will check with the secretary if Vernon Short is also on the guest list. He clambers up into the loft void, using the telescopic ladder. The loft is boarded and lit by a single bare bulb. There are several suitcases, all empty, and boxes of History Today, which go all the way back to the early 60s. And there is a small tidy box, the film of dust undisturbed on its buff-coloured cardboard. Staffe sits cross-legged, places the box in his lap, knowing this is his last hope of a connection between Leslie Crawford and Kerry Degg, or Zoe Bright. He lifts the lid and goes through the contents, item by item. It is a museum of Leslie's life, from the plastic name band for her wrist when she was born, through certificates up to grade 7 in piano and violin, all the way to her O and A level, BA and MA certificates, to a letter congratulating her on gaining her doctorate of philosophy from the Vice-Chancellor of Nottingham University. The subject of her Ph.D., midwifery and the sexual politics of the Victorians. Staffe tries to recall if anything else had suggested that she lived or studied in Nottingham, but he can't. The letter is dated June 2008. Zoe Bright was at Nottingham University from September 2005 to June 2008. He notes down all the details and checks the rest of the box, hoping there might be letters. And then he goes back down below, checking everything again. There is not the faintest draught of breath of life in the house. Sometimes, on a blind search, you have a subconscious agenda. The brain can't help but prescribe what the eye is looking for. So he goes through everything again. This time, he even checks behind all the books on the shelves of the inlaid two-door Stickley case. It is a beautiful piece, and surely beyond the means of what he has seen of Leslie Crawford. It must have belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Bruce, he thinks, replacing the last stack of books, pushing the spine straight, his finger lingering on a hardback of Beloved by Toni Morrison. It makes his heart miss. He removes the volume, looks for an inscription, sees only that it is a signed and dated first edition. Immediately he calls Petal Broom, who is brusque with him. "What the hell do you want?" "Tell me more about Zoe's reading. I'd like to know what book she liked." "Find her and she could tell you herself." Staffe bites his tongue, says, "If you tell me, I might be able to find her." Catch-22? She gets the joke, laughs sarcastically. "Very funny. There was a Hemingway. Bell Tolls, I think." Staffe checks the shelves. No Hemingway. "Go on." "There was a Catherine Mansfield." "Collected short stories?" says Staffe, looking at the spine of Leslie's book. "Of course. And Virginia Woolf." "To the lighthouse." "How do you know?" "Carry on, please." "Anne Tyler?" There are 4 Anne Tyler novels on Leslie's shelves, and Staffe decides to flip the rolls, begins to read from the spines of Leslie's books. "Enduring Love?" "No," says Petal. He goes for something more obscure. Limestone and Clay by Leslie Glaister. She loved Leslie Glaister. There are 7 Glaister novels in Crawford's case. Staffe looks for what he thinks might be the most obscure of all her novels. Cradle to Grave by Gareth Crear. "Yes." "Thanks, Petal. I owe you one," says Staffe, elated, hanging up. He calls Alicia Flint straight away and tells her of the connection between Leslie Crawford and Zoe Bright. It seems strange to hear her voice again. When they're done, she says, "I'm glad you've kept me in the loop, Staffe." He looks out of the front window, sees the men in the front seats of his car. One of them is leaning forward, appears to be faffing about with his shoes. "Don't tell anybody, will you?" "Why not?" "I'll send you everything I've got on Crawford, but keep it yourself." "Why?" "Because we have to find Crawford before anybody else does. She will be able to tell us where Zoe is." "Find her first. Who else is looking for her?" "Dead birds don't sing. That's all I know." "Any luck with the herrings?" says Alicia Flint, laughing. Staffe says, "What?" "Hang on!" He goes into the kitchen, opens the door to the fridge, and sees a tub of roll mops. "You beauty!" "Who?" says Alicia. "The herring is a beautiful thing," he says. "You're going round the bend, Staffe. I told you there's something about Parkgate. And they met at Nottingham University too. Maybe we should meet." "It's halfway," says Alicia. Staffe says goodbye and leaves the house, wiping the smile off his face. "Any luck?" says the man. "Not a sausage," says Staffe. "I told her," says the man, smiling. The mat in the passenger footwell, beneath the man's feet, is an inch out from the line of dirt around it. It has been moved. Staffe says nothing. 23. "There was a residue of rohypnol in her blood," says Pulford. "The clothes are from Topshop, and there's no trace on them apart from Josie herself." "When can I see her?" asks Staffe. "When she wakes." What exactly did happen on the night? Like I said, she was supposed to have got right away from the Archibalds. I called her to say what car Given was in, and I followed. I followed Given all the way, and he just drove round and went back to Putney. There must have been another car behind, following me. So you still can't prove Given knows the Archibalds? But we know he does. What use is that? Well, it's the truth, sir. We can always prove the truth. Staffe is trying to stay annoyed with Pulford, but he can't. The truth of the matter is, we don't know any more than before you allowed DC Chancellor to put herself in danger.
No, sir.
And you'll take it on the chin, Sergeant?
How will we get to Given, sir?
Let me worry about that. Just remember, it's all the more reason to stitch him up with decent evidence. Thank God you took John down there with you. He remembers being a young lad, about Pulford's age and fresh in the force. John had just passed 40, the same as Jessup. He wonders if he will go the way of John Bore, ground down by the job. Will he ever go the way of Jessup? Once his mentor, but tempted too far. Would he ever take it into his own hands? There will be a case out there with his name on it, and he will be shown a way to meet justice, beyond law. It could be this one. Outside, whilst he is busy examining his Peugeot, Staffe gets a missed call. It makes him happy in the pit of his stomach. He feels light in the head and loose in his loins. Against his better judgment, Staffe returns the call, then says precisely what he thinks. "Eve, I'm glad you rang."
Really? You said to call.
Are you working today?
Not until tonight. I start my 10-6 shifts tonight.
How about an early lunch? It will help you sleep the afternoon.
That's thoughtful of you, Inspector, she says jokingly.
There's a place I want to try. It's called Menage.
Will there be just the two of us?
She laughs throatily, and he glimpses a different her, one with the guard down. Getting to know her. Staffe is on his knees. In the car park at the back of the City Royal, beside his Peugeot, you might think he is answering a call to prayer. Appropriately enough, he finds what he is looking for. In the footwell of the passenger seat, he holds the tiny device between finger and thumb. It is no bigger than the decade bead of a rosary.
She's asked for you.
Staffe twists round, feels a nerve pinch. Pulford looks down at him. "I've a job for you." He gets to his feet and puts a finger to his lips. Hands Pulford the device, knowing his sergeant embraces the continuing aspects of his professional development in a way that Staffe does not. Pulford carefully takes the device from him, examines it, and, holding the offending article tight in his fist, whispers,
"It's not police issue, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's a hybrid, a tracking device and a bug. It tells them what you're saying and where you are when you're saying it."
Staffe whispers,
"Put it back where it was, under the mat." "Why?" "Now we know it's there, it's our device. Wait here."
Josie is in the raw. They have bathed her and dressed her in a paper gown. She sits up with her hair combed back off her face. Her eyes are tired, but there is blood back into her lips, and she manages a shallow smile that soon collapses.
"I'm sorry, sir. I was a fool."
"Josh, don't be silly." He sits next to her, takes her hand in both his and squeezes a little. He looks around the room, sees there is nobody, and leans forward, puts his lips to her forehead. He lets the soft kiss stay there for a count of 3, 4.
"Thank you, sir,"
says Josie. Her eyes are glassy. "I don't know," says Staffe, his voice beginning to crack.
"Don't know what?"
A broader smile is on Josie's mouth. Seeing her this way, she could be 16 or 35. "I don't know what I'd do." She nods her head and clamps her mouth shut, for fear she might say something she would regret. "Sit with me, will you?" He nods, holds her hand, still. "Just a while." And after a while, she falls back into sleep, with her mouth turned up. He waits a further while and slides his hand from hers, puts his lips on hers, so they barely touch.
"In 5 minutes, ask me how I got on at Crawford's,"
whispers Staffe, beneath the revving engine, as they drive away from the City Royal.
"Ah,"
says Pulford. 5 minutes later, Staffe answers his sergeant by reporting that nothing whatever had turned up at Crawford's house, and he's pissed off with this case, and they've no chance of catching up with whoever is responsible, and maybe they should just leave it to Cathy Killick and her bloody people, who seem to have all the resources and unrestricted access. For 20 minutes they drive slowly out to the Old Street roundabout and leave the car parked up between the Lime Kiln and Flower and Dean. It's where you'd park if you were staking out Sean Degg's place. Staffe leaves Radio 4 playing low, and then they get a cab to the police morgue. "Why are we going there?" asks Pulford. "Have you met Miles and Maya Degg?" "But Kerry's kids? Do they have Sean's name? That seems odd." "What else would you call them?" "Kilbride? Archibald? I don't know how these things work." "But you wouldn't call them babies?" "Well, they're 3 and 5, right? I've not met them, but I've read the reports." "You know about babies?" "Oh, my sister had them. They're not babies once they can walk." "Even to the uninitiated, like you and me, Sergeant. Thanks." He slaps Pulford on the shoulder and leans back. Watches Whitechapel come at them with its fruit and fish and dodgy boozers and its off-piste city folk and mothers and children, some walking, some babies being pushed. Pulford brings them coffee through from Janine's kitchenette, off to the side of her half-basement theatre. High windows let weak light seep down from the Raven Lane pavement into the world of the pathologist. They sit in a midday twilight, because the buzz of the operating lights drives Janine berserk. Pulford pauses at the waxy white corpse in the corner, spills some of the coffee. Staffe says, "Would you have checked for twins? Could Kerry Degg have had twins?" "She could, but it's a bit late now. It would have helped if we could have looked for that when she was still alive." "Wasn't she too weak?" "Yes, I suppose so, but we could have checked before the post-mortem." "He would have shown up in the post-mortem, though." "You would have had to be looking for it, and the elapsed time was too great, bearing in mind how traumatic the birth was. There was no collateral evidence either. Maybe if we'd known straight away." "What about the placenta? What I found in the tunnel?" Janine shakes her head. "Twins can share a placenta, or have separate placentas, or the placentas can merge to form one. What makes you think she was having twins?" "Something I heard." "What difference does it make?" says Janine. "They only left us one baby." "Sometimes they don't both survive." "You'd have to know what you were doing, surely, to cope with that, to administer that, even if both the twins didn't survive." "It would have been more problematic," she says. "There would have been more signs to clear at the scene." "And imagine, if there is another baby out there, if Grace's twin is out there." The three of them contemplate that, the skills required, the additional twist and nuance of motive, the trail of consequences. Pulford says, if Grace has a brother or sister out there, it would be a crime for them to be kept apart. Who'd do such a thing? What exactly did you hear, Staffe? Kerry's brother-in-law said something about Sean's babies. He said babies. He's got other kids, says Janine. They're not babies, says Pulford. They might have been the last time he saw them. That's how he might see them. Says Staffe. But they're not Sean's. Even if you're right, it seems to me this doesn't change anything. It's still an abduction that turned into murder. Same crime, different motive. Different motive, different suspects, says Staffe. Did you check the records at the clinic? As far as I could, he says. I've just come from there. There was no mention of Kerry having twins. I asked the duty doctor whether, if Kerry was having twins, the last consultation would have spotted it, and he said it would have for sure. But there's no notes from her last consultation. All I can say is there's nothing to suggest she wasn't carrying twins, except... She looked sad. Except what? Except we only have one baby. We're looking, says Staffe. Have you checked all the paediatric wards? As we speak, says Pulford. Staffe turns his mind to who might want the baby. He can't get past Bridget Lamb. But he's been to her house twice now. Not a whimper from upstairs, nor the slightest trace of a nappy, not a grain of SMA. And Malcolm? Could Malcolm be a party to such subterfuge? He loves her enough, that's for sure. Or he might have said babies in all innocence. You have to take babies to be weighed, right? They have to be monitored. Janine says, surely, if you don't register the birth, nobody would know it exists, provided it's healthy. As long as you get some ID by the time they go to school or got poorly, nobody would ever ask where a baby came from. If you moved away, people would assume it was yours. I know this place. Or should I say I've heard of it, says Eve, looking down the lunch menu. Occasionally she issues low moans. I'm hungry now. The portions are starter-sized. If the French did tapas, they would do them like this. Eve closes the menu and smiles at him. In the soft light she appears different. Her face is for the night. She's picked out her cheekbones with rouge and softened her eyes with touche éclat. A thin line of kohl makes her eyes seem brighter, more sultry too, and he sees for the first time that she has a dimple high on her right cheek. Her hair is half up, half down, teased to make it look as if she hasn't made the effort. As they order, he watches her eyes light up and then pinch together, as she has to choose whether her ribbon of lemon sole is to be grilled or pan-fried. Her hair is the same colour as Sylvie's, but her face is fuller, her eyes bigger. Her nails are French manicured, and she wears the Claddagh ring on one hand, a large stone diamond on the wrong wedding finger of the other. Once he has ordered, Eve says, "It's my mother's ring." He is embarrassed. "Did you think I'd been left standing at the altar?" "No." "Liar." "But people our age don't come without a little bit of scar tissue around the vital organs, do they?" "I don't think we're of a similar age." "Inspector, you're not trying to get me to disclose, are you?" "You'd be surprised what I know about you," he says, immediately realising he said the wrong thing. "You checked up on me?" "Can we say, checked you out?" Eve adjusts her expression, as if not to spoil lunch. She frowns, but it is playful. "So, tell me, who am I?" "You're not what you seem. A trained vet who gave up on animals to concentrate on humans." "You think I must be mad." "It can be a dirty business, that vet malarkey," he jokes. He feels relaxed. Pushing pills and screwing owners into agreeing to futile operations, playing on love and hope. My God, how do you know these things? I knew a vet once. Eve raises her eyebrows as if to pry. The waiter brings the wine, and even though she didn't order it, a gin and tonic for Eve. She looks surprised, and then winks at him as if to say she didn't know how he did that, but she's glad he did. For a stretch they each say nothing, but the silence isn't awkward. Usually, it's not good when our worlds collide, he says. We'll have to see. Eve takes a lusty sip from her gin and says, but this is a good start. Plymouth gin too, hey, Staffe? How do you know people call me that? Did you go to see Bridget, the sister? Grace's aunt? I didn't say I was going. Oh, come on, you're a copper, and I've spoken with the victim's sister. Far away. You know her? I know she loves that child. Eve finishes her gin and pours herself a small glass of wine. Tops up Staffe. As she leans forward, Staffe sees that she has no foundation on. Her skin is pale and smooth as china. She says, I went to see Grace as soon as I heard. It's only across the way from my unit. But as much as I love children... The waiter brings their first dish, and Eve lowers her voice. As much as I love them, it's not the same. The same as what? It's not blood. When I was with Grace, saying my kind of a prayer for her, and not wanting to be anywhere but there at that time, it wasn't the same as what that poor woman was feeling. I wasn't going through anything in comparison. She said something to you? She couldn't. She was catatonic. Catatonic? I put my arm around her, and it was like hugging a rock. She was frozen. She didn't dare move as though, I don't know, if she did, the baby might stop breathing. Catatonic, repeats Staffe. For a second he forgets where he is, struggling to lend some order to the theories of Bridget. Respectable wife and almost a teenage mother, sister of Kerry and spurned lover of Sean.
End of Disc 5. Disc 6.
If someone was having twins, one of your patients, you'd record it, wouldn't you? Of course. They need a completely different antenatal regime, and we record everything. No, you don't, thinks Staffe. His telephone rings, and he apologises to Eve, says he has to take it. When he is finally done with the call, he comes back to the table, sits down heavily. What's wrong? She reaches out and wraps her pale, small hands around his clenched fist. He doesn't respond. Don't say. If you can't tell me, I understand, she says. But he knows that no matter how relationships start off, in the end, they never understand. Staffe tries to evaluate the situation. He looks Eve in the eyes and says, They've found Sean Degg. Well, that's good. Behind the gym at Notre Dame School in Hackney. It's where he used to pick Kerry up at the end of the day. Well, that's odd. He overdosed. Enough speed to stop a bull in its tracks, apparently. He's dead? Oh, yes. Of a splattered heart. 24. Nick Absalom manages to catch Staffe's eye as the DI reaches the line of uniformed officers at the back gates of Notre Dame School. This is Hackney, where Kerry and Bridget Kilbride were each schooled and were quartered by Sean Degg. Sean came back, a last time. Clamouring photographers use stepladders to peek above the fence, and they hold their cameras high, the opposite of meerkats looking for distant predators, hoping they might capture a snatch of what lies within the screened rectangle in the shadow of the gym. Are we expected to believe that this is an overdose, Inspector? Asks Nick Absalom, holding his dictaphone by his side. An act of grief. A desire to be with his poor, departed loved one. Who told you that? It's the word. It's what Muppets will print unless advised otherwise. And what will you print, Nick? Well, that depends on what you tell me. Imagine I'm going to tell you nothing. I'd imagine why Breath of Life would do a thing like this. Because Sean had evidence to pin Kerry's abduction on an individual within the organisation. Hence, Leslie Crawford is in hiding, says Absalom. So you're not going with the suicide theory? I'm in the business of selling newspapers. Murder or suicide is no contest. What about jeopardising the case? If I wanted to jeopardise the case, I might speculate why you might have been questioning Kerry Degg's sister. The husband didn't seem too pleased with your visit. What? Hisses Staffe. I wouldn't mention the lambs, of course, if I had something decent to run with. People's lives are at stake here. Really? Staffe grabs Absalom by the sleeve of his coat and pulls him through the line of officers where they can't be overheard. Absalom can't keep the smug look from his face as he regards his peers, the other side of the line and looking daggers. You'll get first run when it's time to release the information. You have information for me. We haven't found the woman in Liverpool. We have to keep her interests uppermost. But there's something else. Let me have a whiff of it. I won't print anything, I swear. Outside the screened area, 2 women and a man, all dressed casually smart, mill around, shaking their heads. Staffe guesses they're teachers. The oldest one, a woman with steel-grey hair, has clearly been crying. Can he trust Absalom? He looks at the other journalists peering this way, and he realises that they are his enemy, and Absalom's enemy too. He can use that. Take that smirk off your face. Look disappointed, and keep your mouth shut until I say you can run this. Okay. Absalom already looks pissed off, the supreme deceiver. Staffe takes a copy of the news from his pocket. It is open at Absalom's latest article on the resurrection of Vernon Short's bill. It has a quote from Breath of Life. Just where did you get this quote from? I can't say. We have to scratch each other's backs. So you give me something. There is another child involved. A small child. Degg's orphans. It's all I'm saying. A baby? Staffe thinks how her association with the spreading misery will suit Leslie Crawford. It will keep the orphaned Grace on the front pages a while longer. Long enough to resurrect Vernon's bill once and for all. I'll give you more as soon as I can. He grabs Absalom, makes a scruff of the lapels of his jacket. He whispers, "Keep Bridget out of this, you hear?" and pushes him back through the line of police. Absalom calls him a fucking jerk for all to hear. Each man looks angry, each enjoying their part in different ways, to different ends. Behind the screens, freestanding boards show photographs of Sean Degg. He had died in a pile, head slumped to his chest and arms outstretched, hands clenched into fists. There is a close-up of a bump at the base of his skull. Behind the ear, a line of dried blood. There's only one sign of needle intrusion that I've seen so far, says Janine. I'll be going over him back at my place later, but he had been drinking for sure. I think it was circulatory collapse, and there are signs of convulsions. A little vomit, but I need to open him up. She taps a photograph of Sean's face, eyes wide open and pupils like pinpricks. He took a load of speed, is what I heard. A planeful would be my guess. Pulford comes across, opening his notebook. I've got Smet getting verification of Given's whereabouts for the time of death, sir, and I spoke to Ross Dennis. What about Bridget Lamb? Are you serious, sir? Too bloody serious. Staffe turns to the SOC officer, asks what was found on Sean Degg's person. Person. An odd term for a dead soul. A quarter bottle of vodka, empty. A few crumbs of rolling tobacco and 1/2 of resin, and 200 ml wraps of MDMA. There were 4 empty wraps and a syringe too. It looks like crystal meth, and we found some ice on him. Janine comes across. Says, from the pre-theatre inspection, he's no meth mouth. Doesn't seem to add up. And no tracks on his arms, just the one mark. Anything else? The socko says, £1.80 and 20 pences in a coin bag in his back pocket, Yale keys and a book. Here. The officer hands Staffe a clear plastic bag with a notebook in it. On the cover is a pen and ink drawing of an angel in a basque. Kerry's, says Staffe, recognising it from his visit to Flower and Dean. There's a receipt from an off-licence down on the New North Road. The time was 1943. He turns to Pulford, says, check that out, and make sure you speak to the person who served Degg, and get them to describe anybody else who was in the shop at the same time, or just before and just after. He turns to the socko. Let me see the money. The socko shows him the plastic bag of 20-pence pieces. See if there's a phone box nearby. Whichever phone is closest to that off-licence, in each direction. I want the details of all calls made 2 hours either side of when Degg was in the off-licence. Run the numbers through the case data filter. I thought you wanted me to bring in Bridget Lamb. I'll do that. When Pulford is gone, and the socko has returned to his painstaking documentation of the scene, Staffe whispers to Janine, that injection. Was it administered in a professional way, would you say? It's a perfectly clean entry, and no signs of tourniquet shadowing. But all kinds of people are expert in IV these days. Why'd you ask? No reason. Not really. Pennington rubs the corners of his mouth with thumb and forefinger. He hasn't spoken since Staffe came to his office. He sighs. Eventually he says, this Sean Degg thing, Staffe. You know, it does stack up as a suicide. Well, of course it could, sir. His wife died in awful circumstances. There's overwhelming evidence that he loved her. I said does, not could. I've looked into Sean Degg's life as deeply as I can, and I know the man was a scumbag, but nobody has ever mentioned that he was into speed. And he's just become a father, the first time. He actually had something to look forward to. He was on the run. Some might say he had plenty to feel guilty about, don't you think? Are you suggesting he might have killed Kerry, sir? Well, there's more than enough circumstantial. Just try presenting the argument. For argument's sake. Pennington laughs at his quip. And maybe he took off with Zoe Bright and fired off a threat to Kathy Killick. You know, we don't have to conflate that case with this. Pennington leans back, looks Staffe in the chest as he says, at least present the argument. It seems you already have, sir. Perhaps you can tell me who sold him the speed. He moved in those circles. We'll need to know precisely who. Evidence, sir. You know where to look. Be sure you take D.I. Smethurst with you. Given? You want me to shake that tree? Keep Smet in the loop, Staffe. Look, if I'm doing this, I need to know what exactly it is that grants Given his immunity. I don't know he has immunity. We know he has an alibi. Test it, says Pennington. And you'll need to scratch around. He doesn't get his hands dirty. I'll need a warrant. For a DNA test. Present the argument, and it's yours. You've changed your tune, sir. If Given had anything to do with what happened to Chancellor, we'll fuck him over with all our might. You can count on that.
Thank you, sir.
Do you really think he's the father of Kerry's first children? Sean was protected by Tommy Given. They had some kind of pact. Under pain of death. Sean was in hiding. They would have needed to know where he was. It would have been someone he was talking to. Pennington folds his arms. Let's imagine it wasn't suicide, for argument's sake. Just who do you think did kill Sean, Staffe? Oh, that's easy, sir. Same as whoever killed Kerry. Someone with the irrepressible need. As Staffe drives down to Cobham in blossoming Surrey, he thinks about how he would like to swerve into Thames Ditton and call on Bridget Lamb, then take things up with Eve. The thought of that conversation makes him nervous. Smet is smoking out of the window and reading the news. When he's not smoking, he's reading the news and scratching his balls. Coming off the A3, he happens upon an article about Vernon Short's bill and how church groups in Reading and Plymouth, Wolverhampton and South Shields have put petitions together supporting the resurrection of the change in the statute governing abortion. There is talk of a national campaign and even a march on Parliament. A spokesperson for Breath of Life says, according to Nick Absalom, that if a country can march to save a fox, they can march to save a human life. The way they put it seems to kind of make sense, says Smet. I spoke to Absalom and asked him who his source is. He wouldn't disclose. Sometimes the bloody law's against us, not with us. And did you read the bit about the woman in Liverpool? For the briefest moment, he considers telling Smet about Leslie Crawford having tutored Zoe Bright. Well, there's nothing happening up there. They've got that Flint woman working the case, I heard. Flint woman? Oh, yes. I know her all right. Had to mentor her when she came down for her assimilation training. She made inspector a couple of years ago. A bright cookie. But you know that, don't you, Staffe? What do you mean? I heard you've been to Beetleland. She'd suit you, that one. Smet laughs. Staffe looks at him, not amused. Just your type. What's my type supposed to be? I don't have a bloody type. You do. Well, so what is it, my type? I'm not saying. Well, I tell you, says Staffe, looking across to Smet, who is delving beneath his belly, scratching at his balls. I don't have that problem. He thinks about what it must be like being Smet. Are his chances all behind him? Smet says, I'm no student of relationships. Christ, none of my mates have even had a sniff in years, but... No, forget it. Go on. Well, it just seems to me you go for women who you know won't work out. And who can blame you? Just enjoy it. Piss off, Smet. Suffer for the rest of us. Oh, pull him, we're here. Staffe pulls off the road and stops in front of Tommy Given's electric gates. He stares up at the driveway, watches Smet talking to the videophone, and as he does, Staffe's phone goes. It is his sister Marie, which won't be good news, he's sure. He lets it ring out, prays it's nothing bad about Harry. He loves his nephew, the closest he's got to a child of his own. Smet gets back in, and as they drive up towards the house, gravel grinding beneath, he says, If you want relationship advice, you should ask this pillar of the bastard community. Have you met his wife and kid? Why would I? You're the one who looks after our friend Mr. Given, eh, Smet? Look after? What's that supposed to mean? Just saying what I see. Is there anything you want to tell me? Just that I don't come here a-prying, I've no need. Staffe gets out of the car, sees the dog coming. It is a killer dog, and the ground resounds as it bounds up, spittle spraying the air. "Shit," says Smet. Staffe makes himself limp and goes down onto his knees, holds his arms out and lets the dog bowl onto him. It licks his hands and face, and Staffe stands, rubbing its skull, scratching at its neck. "You getting out of the car, Smet?" "Is it safe?" "I'd say you're safe." "Nobody's safe," says Tommy Given, walking up to the car, frowning, his first gambit gone awry. "Not from police molestation. What the fuck are you doing here?" "Oh, you didn't call ahead," says Smet to Staffe. "Why would I?" "I'm sorry, Tommy. I thought he'd called." "We're not here to apologise. I've just come to drop this off." He hands a sheet of paper to Given. "What is it?" "It requires you to provide a sample of your DNA. Quite painless." "Why the fuck do you want my DNA?" "Sean Degg is dead, Tommy." "I heard. I've told you where I was." Tommy is thoroughly convincing with his grieving expression. He even appears to be a shade of pale. His beautiful wife, Sabine, appears in the porch with her young daughter beneath a trellised arch of honeysuckle. She rubs her hand on the pronounced bump of her unborn child, looks €1,000,000, maybe more. Tommy says, "Go into the house, Sherry." Sabine looks at Tommy as she does as she is told. For an instant, they are locked in an exchange of togetherness. She twinkles her fingers, and the little girl clutches at the tight calf of her leggings. Tommy must see the look of surprise on Staffe's face, because he says, "Preconceptions, Inspector. They can be bad for the health." "We've not come to cause a scene, Tommy," says Smet. Staffe says, "And we're not here for the good of our health or yours. This is a murder investigation. A double murder investigation, and another woman missing. In your language, Tommy, we're not here to fuck about." Given turns his back on them and walks away, around the side of the house, past the stables, and with a single light pat on his thigh, his killer dog bounds up to him, snaps playfully at his heels. The horses each take a step back, their heads disappearing into their boxes. Staffe and Smet follow him, and Tommy points to a paddock. "This isn't mine, I'll lease it. The neighbour's a farmer, old school. But we get on. His daughter's at the Sorbonne. Sabine helped them out a little." "The country life suits," says Smet. "You could just tell us about Kerry," says Staffe. "It might rule you out of contention for Sean's passing. A bit of information is all we want." Staffe goes into his pocket for a pair of disposable gloves, then tears open a small paper parcel, produces a swab. "If you don't mind." Tommy looks back towards the house, which is obscured by the stable block. He says, "My wife gets one whiff of this, and the law won't help you, Wagstaff." "Easy, Tommy," says Smet. Given opens his mouth, and Staffe steps forward, sticks in the swab, runs it up the inside of the cheek. While Given is unable to speak, Staffe says, "We don't buy your bullshit alibi for 1 second. We'll be getting each and every one of your arse-licking hangers on to cough you up." Tommy's eyes are wide and wild, and Staffe pokes the swab right up into his mouth, thinks Given might bring his teeth gnashing down on his fingers any moment. But Given is more switched on than that. Not in front of another officer. "And if you had anything to do with what happened to my DC, you'll be going down." Staffe pulls the swab out of Tommy's salivating mouth and holds it up towards the house, hoping Sabine might be watching.
"Don't try to embarrass me."
Staffe pops the swab into a sample bag and seals it, says,
"We can only embarrass you if there's something to be embarrassed about." "You're a prick."
"Sean was a friend of yours. What kind of bastard kills a friend?"
"Sean didn't have friends, but I was probably as close as he had. You'll hear plenty of shit about him, but he was a good man, I could see that. And you come here treating me like this, accusing me."
Tommy looks past Staffe to a line of trees on the far side of the paddock. His eyes glaze over, and he looks back to Staffe, says,
"I hope you feel proud of what you do."
25. Staffe knows he has to make the call on Bridget Lamb himself. Pulford is working on the off-licence and payphones down on the New North Road. He needs to dig deep into Bridget, where she is most tender. But he had to drive past, get Given's DNA sample to Janine, and also to end the flickering of his phone. Marie has called him twice more, has messaged that she has to see him, that she's waiting in for him. He pulls up outside his old house in Kilburn, which he rents to Marie for $200 a month plus bills. It's a 3-storey, 4-bedder, and the $200 is half what he has to pass on to the Western Shires Building Society. Around $2,000 less than he would clear each month on the open market. It gives him a tax loss that he can offset, and this is what makes it not charity. By calling on Marie rather than speaking on the phone, he will have some kind of an upperness of hand. It is the nature of their relationship that this is something he wishes to hold over a sibling. He speaks to his nephew Harry at least once a week, but seldom to the boy's mother. It is a dead cert that after months of silence, Marie wants something. Marie opens the door, and her mouth shapes into a widening, spaced-out smile. She holds out her arms and says, slow and wasted, "My brother, I called you. Just today I called you." She leans forward, puts her hands on his hips and kisses his cheek. "Wasn't it?"
"Where's Harry?"
"Broken up. For Easter. He's with his dad."
"Paolo?"
"No, silly. Paolo's here. With his real dad."
"But he's a wanker." "Not, of course, that Paolo isn't a wanker," Staffe iterates silently. Marie lets go of him and takes an unsteady step away.
"Paolo and I have a plan. We need to be together much more. A proper family. It's why I called you."
Staffe thinks, oh, shit, poor Harry. What's in store for the boy now?
As she leads him through his house to the kitchen, he feels a wash of nostalgia for the few months he made this his home. There were good times, he thinks, until Jada's Golding. Until Sally Watkins and that awful case. Briefly, he thinks of his old boss, Jessup. He corrects himself. Those times were a mess. They pass the open door to the drawing room, which seems to be tidy. The kitchen is orderly, with only a light dusting of condiments and unwashed mugs. Paolo is out back in the tiny garden, where he drags, chilled, on a joint. "We've something to tell you, Will," says Marie, beckoning Paolo in. He takes a long last toke and stubs the half-smoked spliff out in his fingers. His eyelids are heavy and his lips are malleable as he says, at the very limit of his powers, "Will, dude, how's it going, man?" "Shall I tell him?" says Marie. "Tell him," beams Paolo. I'm pregnant, Will. Marie actually jumps clean off the floor and claps her hands like an infant. Shit, says Staffe. He says it out loud and instantly apologises, but it's too late. The damage is well and truly done. Marie is utterly crestfallen. Paolo tells him his herb business is going gangbusters, fucking gangbusters, man. The reason he came, rather than call her on the telephone, was to catch her unawares, not be caught out like this. But, like an idiot, he says, if there's anything you need, anything, I'll see what I can do. At least you've plenty of space here. And your landlord's not going to kick you out. He's not a complete bastard. He laughs, and she does not. Eventually, she smiles. Then she hugs him, saying into his chest, so she can't see his expression, "It's all right, Will. Everything's forgotten. I know you love me, and especially Harry. And there's going to be a new little person, a niece for you, or another nephew." She unlocks the hug and leans away from him. "And as it goes, there is something." "What is it?" The front door swings violently open, and a tumbling resounds from the hallway, and then a scream. They each turn towards the sound, and Harry enters, dressed as a Native American, his chest bare and war paint smeared all across his face. When he sees his uncle, the young boy drops his bow and arrow and runs full pelt at Staffe, launching himself at his uncle's midriff. Staffe catches him and lets Harry wrestle him to the ground, sits on his chest. When he looks up, Marie says, "Paolo's got him watching westerns. He knows the cowboys are the bad guys, of course." She turns to Staffe, rests the flat of her palm on her bump. He can see it now, the new life. Flat on his back, with his nephew bouncing up and down on him, he thinks how peculiar that she should fall pregnant now. She says, "We found a nest. They call it El Nido." Eve is wearing a dressing gown. Staffe touches her arm and knows immediately that it is silk. They're in the doorway on the 4th floor of her mansion block on the castle now, where that grand thoroughfare meets the river. Staffe knows this building of old. He looked at buying here once, and knows what it is worth. He knows, roughly, the salary of a nurse on the NHS. In isolation, the two things don't equate. He says, "Did I wake you?" "It's afternoon." He knows there could be a dozen reasons to explain the mismatch. Inheritance, crazy banks, a fractured relationship. "You're on a 10-6. Her eyes are puffy and her hair is down and dishevelled. "Have you had your night's sleep?" "How did you know I was here?" "It's where you live." "I didn't tell you." "I wanted to see you, so I found you." He takes a step closer, puts his hands on her waist. They slide a couple of inches to the soft ledge of her hips. She smiles. Her lips are plump. "What can I do for you?" He smiles, looks over her shoulder and into the flat, thinks he can smell a meal just made. "Like I said, I wanted to see you. Is it okay? Do you have someone here?" "You can see me. Of course you can. When would you like to do that?" Eve rubs her face as if something has irritated it. "You were with Sean at the hospital. Grace's father." She turns her back on Staffe, goes into the apartment saying, "This is your work, right?" He reaches, takes a light hold of her wrist just to stop her moving away from him. Her wrist is warm and thin, and she turns on her heel. Even though she is barefooted, she moves like a dancer, smooth as breeze. Her big eyes are wide now and close to his. He puts a hand on the narrow ledge of her hip again. They fit. She moves a half step towards him, and he watches as her eyes dim, then close. Their lips come together. She presses her mouth tight to his, keeping it shut. But her hands are in his hair, and she moves a quarter step closer, as far as she can. She opens her mouth, ever so slightly, and he tastes menthol. She's cool, wet, and their heads slant the opposite way. His hands find the small of her back and the hollow of her neck. The tips of their tongues touch, and she pulls away. "Tell me what it is," she says. He can't take his eyes off hers. "It's nothing." "What happened?" He shakes his head. "Come in and sit down. I'll make us a drink. Then you can tell me." The living room is painted warm lemon and pale orange, and she has a couple of Georgia O'Keeffe prints. Moorish rugs on the floor. He says, "How do you know something has happened?" In the kitchen, which is knocked through to the living room space, American style, she puts an Italian coffee pot on the hob, then comes alongside, slumps back into the sofa. "You're here, aren't you?" He is flummoxed, says, "I went to see his body." "God." Eve hooks her arm through his and curls her feet under her bottom, rests her head on his shoulder and wraps her free arm around his waist. They stay like that a long while. He thinks about Kerry's visits to the hospital that were never recorded. How could that be? And then the child is born in such a manner, and the father falls victim to an expertly conceived and precisely administered ingestion of high-octane narcotics. And Eve's mournful presence by Grace's bed. Her large, dark eyes. Who said to keep your enemies close? She squeezes his hand and murmurs, "That poor child. No parents now. What will become of her?" Imagine if she had a sister or a brother, and they never met. What? Eve unravels herself from Staffe and sits up. Have you ever come close to having children? It's early days, Will. He puts an arm around her, can't bring himself to look her in the eye. I'm sorry, I asked too many questions. It's your job, she says, standing. I can still be sorry. You can see to the coffee. I'm going to get dressed. Don't. He reaches out, takes a hold of her thigh. The dressing gown rises slowly across her skin. Her legs are brown from winter sun. He doesn't even know where she was. She leans down. Her hair tumbles between their faces as she stoops, finds his mouth, and sits across him. Let me. And he does. Afterwards, as soon as he hears the shower run, then the noise slowly dampened from a closing door, Staffe takes the burned coffee pot from the stove. The handle scorches his hand, but he manages not to drop it. He wraps a folded tea towel around the handle and pours a cup. The liquid is soupy, overbrewed. He looks for milk in the fridge and sees that Eve has none. Then wonders if she might have a reserve of UHT or creamer in the cupboards. The first one he opens, he sees a round tin of powdered milk. The image of a baby being doted on by its mother. SMA Extra Hungry Infant Milk. The shower is still running. With an eye on the door to her bedroom, Staffe opens Eve's handbag. He closes it, sits, and stares at it. Still the shower runs. He hates this job sometimes, despises the person he becomes. When Eve comes into the living room, she is brand new. Her hair is wet, but she has on a cream Angora sweater that leaves a seam of her tummy showing. Her midriff is brown, and he could ask where she collared her winter son, but he doesn't. His mind has turned to Bridget Lamb, and to the final question he has for Eve. There's no easy way. He pours her coffee, and immediately she says, "I take it black." She drinks it down, doesn't grimace. If Kerry was having twins, wouldn't you have known about it? We have 3,500 babies a year through prenat, so of course I wouldn't know about it. I've told you before. Everything's computerized. He looks at his watch. She looks hurt, and she takes a deep breath, as if she might lay into him. But she catches herself, steps into her shoes, and slings the handbag over her shoulder. "I'll come down with you. I need to get bread and milk." Once he is through the Richmond gates of the deer park, passage along the meandering tracks is slow. Because it is Easter, the holidaying children are out in herds, some with working mothers stealing a day, others left to play on their own by chatters of au pairs. The deer are hither and thither, mainly on the fringes of the woods on the high slopes. Wending to Kingston Gate, he runs the conversation with Eve one more time. They had kissed in the common hall of the mansion block, her harder than him, and when they had pulled away, the look in her eyes made him feel warm, then immediately cold. He can't get it out of his head. Was she afraid, or was she warning him with her powdered glare? More tangibly, why, when he looked into her handbag, had he seen, written on the back of an envelope from Thames Water, Sean, followed by Deg's number? Had Sean called Eve, with one of his many 20-pence pieces? He blows out his cheeks and says, "Damn!" aloud. He tries to think of something else, but can only divert himself as far as his sister, as if simply living under the auspices of an alien tongue will solve her problems. He fears for Harry in this new start, how he will cope in such new conditions. Paolo, it seems, has a friend in a place called the Alpujarras in southern Spain. It is supposedly the real Spain, and land can still be had for twopence. Paolo, genius that he is, has been wised up to an old finca with 20 hectares, where he can grow herbs. Also, there is a poplar wood, which they can plunder and plant for beams for the building trade. They can make a little money, make like heaven on earth. Paolo's words. The whole thing will only take a year, and Paolo and his friend will do the work on the finca. When it is done, half of it will be Staffe's, naturally. All he has to do is stump up 80,000 euros for the land and materials. When it is done, it will be worth 250,000, all day long, according to Paolo the loafer, the occasional gardener, the master builder with his trowel under a bushel. And Staffe's Spanish will help, too, according to Marie. The thought of brushing up makes him sad, reminding him of how and where his parents were murdered. Staffe had seen the unuttered desperation on his sister. She had taken a hold of his hand and placed the palm on her swell, and he had called his broker, asked if he could draw the 80,000 euros against his Kilburn house. It might take a week, he had told Marie, and she had burst into happy tears. Paolo rolled a fresh one. Malcolm Lamb has a haunted expression. He shows Staffe through to the morning room, overlooking the garden where Bridget is kneeling amongst a crescent of meadow flowers that run across the right side of her lawn. Malcolm calls her, and she waves, smiling. Then she sees Staffe, and the joy evaporates like dew. She pushes herself up and shrieks, looks down at her hand, which is bleeding. Malcolm mutters, "My God, oh no, my good God," and rushes out. Staffe picks the last of the china splinters from Bridget's hand. She had pressed down on the saucer as she stood, and lost barely a half-teaspoon of blood, but Malcolm had become apoplectic, repeating how he can't bear to see her suffer. She's upstairs, changing, and as they wait, Malcolm says, "You know, Bridget hasn't a bad bone in her body. She's nothing to do with any of this, Will. She keeps a brave face, but don't let that deceive you. This is breaking her heart. First Kerry, and now Sean." But she had no time for Sean.
It's a human life. Someone she had been close to.
Bridget comes down and throws her blooded dress into the utility room. Malcolm goes to get it, but she says,
"Leave it, Malcolm. Just leave it."
The smile she forces dies under its own weight.
"Please."
Staffe says, "I need to know precisely where you were and with whom the night before last, all evening."
"I was here."
"From 6 till midnight, every minute." He glances at Malcolm. "And you too."
"We were here, together," says Bridget.
"Did someone phone the house?" Malcolm sits down, puts his head in his hands. When he looks up, his face is quite grey. Bridget says,
"That's when Sean died, am I right? You're asking these questions because you think I might have killed him."
Her voice tremors. She tries to catch a look from Malcolm, but he studiously looks at the floor, begins to talk. "We were at a meeting in Kingston. There were plenty of people there. It will be easy to verify. We went at 7:30 and stayed until gone 10. Then we gave someone a lift home to P.2. We got back here at around 11. "We got the end of Newsnight," says Bridget. "I can't abide him, that Paxman. But it was the girl, the Jew." "Who did you give the lift to?"
"The point is, we couldn't have done it," says Bridget. "We have people who can vouch. Isn't that enough?"
"I don't understand why you'll be reluctant to tell me."
"They're good people. We are good people. It isn't right, that's why."
"What was the meeting?"
"It was our church,"
says Malcolm. "Which is?"
"It's not a church as you would think of one," says Bridget.
"Look, a man has been murdered, not to mention your sister. Your niece was in intensive care, for Christ's sake."
"There's no need for that," says Bridget.
"Tell me!" Malcolm says, "It's the house of the Holy Innocents."
"We were worshipping, for crying out loud,"
says Bridget, standing. "Don't get upset, darling." She goes to the sideboard, hands Staffe a leaflet. At the top it gives an address on Norbiton Road. At the bottom, the Reverend Lawrence Hands has signed the newsletter. "What was the meeting in aid of?"
"What does that matter?"
says Malcolm. Staffe says, "You must understand, the more you evade my questions, the more likely I am to think you have something to be ashamed of."
"Ashamed?"
Staffe stands. "Where are you going?" "To see the Reverend Hands."
"Don't!"
says Malcolm. He stands, but is unsteady and totters back to the sofa, lands heavily, groaning. "What's wrong?" says Staffe.
"It's his levels,"
says Bridget. "Levels?" he says, as Bridget goes to the sideboard and opens a leather pouch. "Ah, insulin." A shabby memory emerges. Strange how deep and dark the mind can make its recesses. Staffe looks at the floor as Bridget calmly tends her husband. They were 13, he and Malcolm. Staffe was just one of a gang, and Woodsy had got hold of Malcolm's bag and stamped on the kit inside. Malcolm hadn't grasped Woodsy up, but neither did Staffe, Not even when the ambulance came for Malcolm because he hadn't got his insulin fix. "I'll tell you about the meeting," gasps Malcolm. "That's all right, Malcolm. It's not necessary. Not now." "Did you remember something? You look peculiar," says Malcolm. "So long as you don't feel sorry for me, Will. Don't you dare do that. It's too late." He flinches as Bridget feeds him his drug. "I remembered when Woodsy... I was at your house when your parents were killed. The police came and Marie was at home. My father saw the police pull up and he went round. We looked after Marie when your parents died, and you went off the rails, I remember. And look at you now. Look at us both." Malcolm laughs at himself, it seems. Or perhaps not. 26. The House of the Holy Innocents is a down-at-heel, turn-of-the-century chapel which looks Methodist or Congregationalist. Nowadays, from the outside at least, it doesn't conform to what you would expect of a holy house. The windows are cracked, and the chimney is crudely pointed. Beneath the patched-up roof, the running boards hang down, rotten and flaking. Out front is a 10-plated Mercedes with a silver fish of St. Peter on its tail. 35 grand's worth of chariot. Inside, the house is high, nonconformist. On 3 walls, hand-fashioned quilts hang, and staff suspects that this is a place where they clap happily, where guitars strum all over the hymns. From a back room, a dog-collared man in a red tracksuit strides boldly towards staff. He reaches out with a big hand and beams a yellow-toothed smile. "Lawrence Hands." His shock of russet hair struggles against a damped-down parting. "You need not beat around the bush, Inspector," he booms, as if addressing a packed congregation. "I'm here to uphold the law of the land, and God's law too." "Which would you choose, if you had to?" says Staffe, wondering how the Reverend knows he is police. A call from the Lambs, perhaps. "The one should represent the other, don't you think? I am answerable to God, just like you, Inspector." "And Sean and Kerry Degg?" "Baby Grace, for that matter, oh yes. We've been offering up our prayers for that innocent soul." The Reverend sits on the end of a pew and beams at Staffe, as if his smile is sculpted. "The Lambs said I was coming. I can vouch for them. Reverend, would you go beyond prayers to save an abandoned soul? This is a church." "Who prays with you, besides Bridget and Malcolm Lamb?" "There are many fine people." "Do you subscribe to the beliefs of Breath of Life?" "Of course. You knit me together in my mother's womb. We are God's work from the get-go, Inspector." "And what of their methods?" "I know Leslie Crawford. Why would I pretend that I don't? She has a great mind, a lively mind. If you've ever heard her speak, you would understand." "Do actions speak louder than words?" "You won't get me to judge her. We have a Lord for such things." Lawrence Hand's smile grows impossibly wide. He shows his scarlet gums. "I will need to see a list of your congregation and affiliated churches. Is there a denomination as such?" "You could say we are independent." "The list, please." "I'm not sure we have such a thing." Staffe looks around the church, sees nothing that might help him. But Hans doesn't know that, and he rubs his chin, nods to himself. "You're a charity, right?" The Reverend's smile falters. "What?" "If you're a charity, you will have benefactors. You will account to the Commission for your income and expenditure. All your income. Your Mercedes. It's a nice one, A brand spanker. It's a year old. I'm curious. Would that car belong to you or to the church? If it was the church, I suppose you would have to declare it as a benefit in kind. As you said, it's not really your business. You've heard of the Crown prosecution, Reverend? Well, we sing from the same hymn sheet. You can't intimidate me. Is that what you call it? When a policeman takes an interest in the statutes of the land? I have to say we do see the world in different ways. I suppose we are answerable to different deities after all. The smile is back. Mine is not an adversarial system. And mine is not necessarily so. I only have to dig so far. When I get what I want, I stop. Do you think there might be a list, Reverend? I can look. I'll come with you. Janine has a mischievous look on her face as she sits down opposite Staffe in the back snug of the Hand and Shears. It's an expression you'd never see when she has her forensic hat on. What's amusing you? He says. When you give me something, I can tell what you want the outcome to be. The outcome will be what the outcome is. That's the beauty of your job, it's a science. You don't know how lucky you are. So is yours. Until people get involved. They usually crop up somewhere along the line. Staffe taps his glass against Janine's large Merlot, and, drinking from his Virgin Mary, says, A little early. I'm done. I was in at 6. A rush job for some inconsiderate types I know. Damn them. And I suspect the news is not good. Tommy Given's DNA is conclusive, Staffe. He's not the father of Miles or Maya Degg. What? You'll have to look elsewhere for the father. Are you sure? It's a scientific fact. Staffe downs his tomato juice and stands. Charming, says Janine. I'll just drink this on my own then, shall I? We'll go for a drink tomorrow, if you fancy. A little birdie told me you were seeing someone, kind of a colleague of mine in a roundabout way. There's some big-mouthed birdies around. Are you off to see our friend Mr. Given? Maybe. Staffe knows he has to meet Alicia Flint up in Nottingham, is calculating whether he has time to make a diversion. If you can get him to cough up some sperm, I could check if he's able to be any kind of father. I wasn't expecting it to be that kind of a visit. Janine laughs. You can be rather persuasive when you want. Give it a whirl. Fortunately, I know my biology, and he is able. He has a daughter. Which might insinuate that he and Kerry weren't lovers. She seemed to get knocked up easily enough. Which set Staffe thinking. As he drives down to Cobham to call on Tommy, this time without Smet, he looks down at Lawrence Hand's list of members on his passenger seat. He is growing tired of the A3. Doesn't even look at the city towers receding in his rear view, finally disappearing beneath the cusp of Kingston Hill. The benefactors of the House of the Holy Innocents include Leslie Crawford and Bridget Lamb. Most surprising of all, though, is the name of a Thomas Given of Cobham. His phone goes, and he sees it is an unknown number, which probably means it is the station, so he takes it, but hears a weak, vaguely familiar voice. Sir? Yes? It's me, Josie. He wants to say that she sounds terrible, but refrains. You should be resting. I was going crazy in there. You've no business discharging yourself. Too late, sir. Where are you? I'm going to see Given, but keep it under your hat. Can you pick me up on your way? I can meet you at Whitechapel Tube. No, I'm out west, says Staffe. I need to get back into the swing, sir. Tomorrow, Chancellor.
Give me something to do.
Run the numbers again that Sean Degg called from the payphone.
How do we know which were his calls?
You don't. I've got the obvious numbers. There's just one we can't match. To a mobile. Tommy Given's brow is crumpled, his mouth downturned. He jigs his leg double time and thumps his big clump of a fist up and down on the arm of his Lloyd loom armchair in the conservatory. Away across the paddock, his beautiful wife is leading his beautiful daughter out on a cloud-white miniature pony. I owe you an apology, Tommy. You'll owe me more than the fucking apology if you haven't pissed off by the time my wife is back. What the fuck exactly are you sorry about anyway? About Miles and Maya. Kerry's kids? I thought you were the father. You sad bastard. Who is? How would I know? What was your relationship with Kerry? There wasn't one. Tommy's leg stops jigging, and he puts his hands together, begins to wring them, staring into a middle distance, somewhere between Staffe and his loved ones. You took care of Sean. You made sure he was safe. That's your opinion. Does Ross Dennis work for you? He's a Bow-Bells fuckwit. You should know your geography. But so was Sean. What makes Sean different? And why would you have a hotline to Miles and Maya's foster parents? That's shit. And because Sean was safe, I'm thinking there must have been something between you and Kerry. And I'm thinking I can't see Sean getting Kerry that residency at the Rendezvous, not on his own. So that leaves me with the impression that you and Kerry were close. And if you were, and you're denying it, then that's pretty dodgy. You can see that, can't you? I don't need to see anything. I'm not involved. Does Smet know you're here? Oh, you lost that kind of immunity when you fucked with a police detective. You know that shit. You should have called him. Staffe takes out his BlackBerry, scrolls to the attachment to Pulford's last email. It lists the calls from the payphones down on the New North Road. The last thing Sean did before he died was get wasted. The last thing he did before that, he looks at the bold items on the call log, was call Ross Dennis. Within 3 hours, he'd committed suicide, supposedly. Why aren't you talking to Dennis? Staffe is looking at the data, keeping to himself the small lie he has just told. Sean did call Dennis, but it wasn't his last call. That was reserved for the unknown mobile. He looks up at Tommy. I wanted to see the organ grinder. You're full of shit. How do you think we found out Sean was in your keep? Tommy's leg jigs again. Why did you give the word to have him taken out of the game? You're trying to stir things up. Well, I'm not having it. Given stands up, towers over Staffe. You're out of your jurisdiction, Wagstaff, and out of your depth. Get the fuck out of my house. It's not just Kerry, though, is it? How about Bridget? Tommy takes a hold of Staffe's jacket. He scrunches it tight with one hand and lifts Staffe out of his chair. Staffe looks Tommy in the mad eyes and fears that should Tommy decide to kick off, there would be little he could do. He tries to swallow, but can't. He's on his tiptoes now, tasting the angry breath of the man of the house. The dog barks and bounds in from the dining room. It jumps at Staffe and takes his trouser leg in its bludgeon muzzle. Staffe wheezes. And the Reverend Hans? Let go of me! Fuck that dog off! I'll have you in. Your wife, too. Tommy's mad eyes go wider, but his grip slackens ever so slightly, and Staffe takes the opportunity to suck in deep, get some air. "You're in the Holy Innocents, I know. So is Leslie Crawford." "That's crap. You're in the shit, Tommy. You have to start talking. You shouldn't be here." "I'm here for Kerry, and Sean, and Grace." Tommy shakes his head. "Is Giselle yours?" Given takes a hold of Staffe with his other hand, clasps him around the neck, and lifts him clean off the ground. His eyes bulge, and his head is light, his face bursting with fluid. He can't breathe. Tommy's face becomes paler and paler. Staffe whites out, feels the air all around him, then the wicker crackle of the sofa. The ground slaps him heavily, all along one side. A dog snarls, and he can feel the lick and spray of its spittle. Somehow he manages to say, "I'm on to you." "Tommy, what's a-going on?" Her voice is soft and unmistakably continental. "Nothing, Sherry," says Tommy. "I hope not," says Sabine. The dog moves away from Staffe, who sits up, his back to the sofa, and says to Sabine, "We were messing about. I bet Tommy the dog couldn't get me to the floor without biting." He takes out a tenner and hands it to Tommy. "You win. I'll get you next time, though." "He bites, for sure," says Sabine. "Why are you here?" "It's about the Holy Innocents, Madame Given." "The what?" "Just give us a minute or so, Sherry," says Tommy. He takes Sabine by the arm and stoops, brushes her hair behind her ear and kisses its lobe. He might be saying something, but Staffe can't hear. The infant Giselle, meanwhile, is playing with the killer dog's head, as if it is a rag doll. Sabine walks away, trailing her hand in his as she goes, until they are apart. At the door, she says, "You should tell him, Thomas. You have nothing to be ashamed of." They look each other in the eye, clear as day that they are in love. It seems that the trust in each other is unbreachable. Seems also that, together, they have something to fear from the world. Tommy offers Staffe a hand, and he accepts it, is pulled to his feet. He and Tommy stand toe to toe, neither quite sure who holds the upper hand. He looks out across the paddock, hangs his head. "You should know. I won't let anything harm Giselle and Sabine." "And the new baby?" Tommy nods. "That's right." "Your new baby?" "It's mine, all right, you prick. Don't you worry about that. Now get out." "Tell me about Kerry. What was she to you? Tell me, and I can leave you in peace." "Kerry," he laughs. "Christ, that girl." Still looking across the paddock. As if in a trance, Tommy says, "I loved her, you know. She'd drive you berserk, but I loved her." "Loved her? Like?" Tommy looks as if he's coming round from anaesthetic. "She's my sister's girl. Me and my sister, we weren't that close, you know. I was young and she killed herself. She left Bridget and Kerry and I did fuck all to help. And when I'd grown up enough to realise what I'd done, it was too late." "You're their uncle. You're the great-uncle of Miles and Maya. They don't know who I am or what I am, so you don't say a word. So help me God, you don't utter a fucking word to Bridget or them kids." "You go to the same church as Bridget. She must know who you are." He shakes his head. "You've got to be joking. She's not got a loving heart, that one. And that might be my fault. But I don't care if she calls herself a Christian or what. There's no way she'd ever forgive me. And Kerry? Kerry was everybody's favourite, and it ruined her. She could be a monster. A real monster. That's why you helped Sean out. That man was a saint. Don't you listen to what anybody says. And Miles and Myers' father? He's fucked off. Knows what's good for him. Did you kill him, Tommy? As if I would. Maybe I should ask Smet. Maybe I've told you enough, and you should be fucking grateful and let just this one sleeping dog lie. How come you forgave Sean for what he did to Bridget? She lost that baby's all. It was bad fortune. But he loved Kerry. God knows he loved those kids too, even though they weren't his. Who killed Sean, Tommy? Sean killed Sean. You believe it? It's what I want to believe, and that's the truth. Where's Leslie Crawford? How the fuck would I know? He takes Staffe by the arm, leads him to the front door. That's me done. You leave my family out of it, you hear? I've cooperated, but that's the end of me. Got it? 27. Staffe sees her anew, as if for the first time. Her hair is down, and he thinks she might have straightened it. Her back straight, she looks elegant. But this time he doesn't feel any kind of flutter around the heart. As she brings him up to date with her end of the case, he tries to work out why he isn't remotely attracted to her. The answer is unwelcome, and all about Eve. Alicia Flint says, "We've checked the cameras all the way along Zoe's route and at the railway station." She senses that she doesn't have his undivided attention, so she touches his elbow. "You were right." "Right?" "We interviewed at Wavertree railway station to see if anyone remembered Zoe, but we didn't ask at the other end." "We didn't actually know where she was going." "I assumed it was Parkgate, like you said." "There's no station?" "The nearest station is Neston. Nobody knew her, but she'd have to get a bus." "What about the bus driver?" "Bingo," says Alicia Flint. "She went to Parkgate the day she disappeared." Alicia gets into a large car outside Nottingham railway station, and he gets in alongside. She unfurls a laptop and navigates her way to the file she wants, taps a button, says, "This is from Wavertree Station," points at the screen, and plonks the computer on his lap, begins the drive to the university campus. Looking at the screen, Staffe says, "That's Zoe. Who's that with her?" He squints, angles the screen, and peers at the image. It's Anthony. When was this?" "The same day, the day she disappeared. It's 12 minutes after the argument with her father." "But he's hugging her." On the screen, Zoe Bright looks around nervously, as if she might be looking for snipers on a skyline. She clocks the camera and pushes Anthony away. He holds out a hand to her. She takes it. "Is that a package? What's he giving her?" "We had the frame digitally enhanced. What do you think it is?" Staffe peers at the screen again. "A book?" He feels a smile pool upon his face. "Beloved." Clever boy. That means he knew she was going away. Maybe he was expecting her not to come back. What's he said to you about this? "We can't ask him. His solicitor is saying he's in no fit state to be questioned. That was no suicide attempt. He was provoked. You mean I provoked him, says Staffe. They could get litigious. My hands are tied. Staffe tries to fathom why Anthony Bright would bid his wife farewell the day she disappeared, seemingly knowing that she was about to be taken and catering for that by handing her a favourite book, and then refuse to cooperate in the investigation of her disappearance, indeed, go to extreme lengths to prevent the police questioning him. Have you ever heard of the House of the Holy Innocents? Flint shakes her head. No cranky religion in Anthony's life. We stripped his house and there was nothing like that. In fact, nothing much at all. You saw their house. She was a reader with no books. And no DVDs. Only a few photographs on the walls. No albums. As if it had been wiped clean. You think Anthony's our man, says Alicia. What do you think? I'm thinking Leslie Crawford. She's why we're here. Alicia Flint turns into the driveway of Moore House, where the Dean of the Faculty of Culture, Letters and Thought has his office. It is a neoclassical building, but with Edwardian bay windows. Clematis gropes at the upper stories, and students gaggle and smoke on the lawn that slopes out front. Zoe and Crawford know each other. They read the same books, precisely the same books. They were here at the same time, involved in the same subject, one an undergraduate, the other a research student. Surely that means Crawford wouldn't abduct Zoe, says Alicia. Zoe knows and trusts her. It will be easy, wouldn't it? But the closer we get to Crawford, the more danger we could put Zoe in. Have you considered what Crawford might do to protect the path back to her? Of course. Sean Degg might have paid that price. She knew Degg. She's a member of the House of the Holy Innocents, that crackpot church I told you about, and so was Bridget, Kerry's sister. Bridget and Sean used to have a thing. Jesus. At reception, they're taken straight through to see the Dean, Professor Robert Flanders. He sports a full jet-black beard and wild silvery hair. He wears a crusty old suit and hush-puppies, and stands with his arms pointing out, his feet planted east and west, a befuddled look on his face, as if he is disturbed in the middle of building new logic. He offers sherry, which Staffe and Flint decline, then calls through for some coffee, pours himself a large schooner of fino. Staffe says, "We told you that we're trying to discover whether a Dr. Leslie Crawford ever taught an undergraduate called Zoe Flanagan. Dr. Crawford was here writing up a DPhil between 2005 and 2008. I summoned the class lists." Flanders hands pieces of paper to Staffe and Flint. "This is Miss Flanagan's transcript. It shows all the modules she took. I have checked with Human Resources, and Dr. Crawford didn't ever teach on these modules." "Are you sure?" says Alicia Flint. "Why would I say this to you were I not sure?" Flanders smiles, drinks lustily from his sherry. "However, Dr. Crawford did supervise some dissertations on Miss Flanagan's programme of study." "She supervised Zoe?" "We can't tell. We have 2,500 students in this faculty." "Wouldn't the programme leader remember her?" "Probably not. And in any event, she's moved on." Flanders drains his sherry and points to 3 large boxes under the window. "I took the liberty of requisitioning these from our archive, all the dissertations from 2008. As Flanders leaves the room, bottle of fino in hand, he says, "The building closes at 7 during the vac." They each take a box and begin by checking the carbon covering sheets with the tutor's faded, barely legible comments. 20 minutes in, Flint holds a copy aloft, waving it in the air. "Aha! We have a signature of the esteemed Dr. Crawford. Staffe takes a copy of the letter from Breath of Life and compares its signature to that on the comment sheet of the 20-page dissertation. Yes, that's her. He looks at the paper, sees that it is submitted by a Suzanne Byrne, and its title is Jane Austen, Mother of Chicklet, a blueprint for the inevitable demise of feminism. Quite the reactionary, our good doctor. I don't know, says Flint. I think the bra burners have got something to answer for. Here am I, got a 2-1, got a career, not seen my son for 2 days, and I feel like a worthless harlot. They race through to the bottom of their boxes, looking for a reprise of Crawford's signature, and then, having failed to find a paper for Zoe, share the contents of the third box. Half an hour later, Staffe finds another script with Crawford's signature on it. He checks the name of the student and sighs, puts it on the pile and looks at the next. He's tired. Too tired. Then it hits him. Zoe, he says. You got it, says Flint. No. Staffe goes back to the last paper. But I've got Anne-Marie. She changed her name. He brandishes the paper. We'll need to get her deed poll papers. Crawford knows Zoe Bright, and now we can prove it, says Staffe. And it looks as if she was one of the chosen ones. Look, she got a 74, that's a first, says Alicia. He looks at the script itself, sees the title. Feminism Can Damage Your Health. The Malnourished Mother and the Malevolent Manifestos of the 70s. Flint leans back and sits cross-legged, her arms wrapped around her knees. What now? We can issue an order for Crawford's arrest. But how does Anthony fit in? He can't be in cahoots with Crawford, surely. Staffe writes a receipt for the Anne-Marie Flanagan papers. You have to speak with Anthony again.
End of Disc 6.